सिंह साहब नमस्कार।
नमस्कार। नमस्कार सिन्हा जी, नमस्कार। कैसे हैं आप?
बहुत ठीक ठाक हैं, बिल्कुल। आप?
बिल्कुल ठीक हूँ, बहुत अच्छा लग रहा है।
थैंक यू सो मच फॉर मेकिंग टाइम। मुझे 2 मिनट दीजिएगा, मैं जरा कुछ औपचारिकताएं पूरी कर लूं, उसके बाद प्रोफेसर सर आपको इंट्रोड्यूस करेंगे। 2 मिनट। Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to day 3 of the Republic of Letters Groundbreak 2020 conference. We had an excellent attendance from all of you over the last 2 days. Yesterday, we had 1,300 people join us on Zoom, and we had over 500 more people join us over YouTube. Today, we are also broadcasting both on Zoom and YouTube. Thank you very much for joining us. We have a very interesting lineup again today. Like the other days, we have 3 keynote speakers and we have 3 panels across each of our 3 tracks. So a very rich set of speakers and topics for us to share with all of you. I'm delighted to introduce the first event of the day. Our opening keynote address is delivered by Professor D.P. Singh, who's the chairman of the University Grants Commission. We organizers at Ashoka and Harappa are extremely grateful to Mr. Singh for having made time during a very difficult period for all of us. His keynote address is around reinventing Indian universities, and to introduce Professor Singh, I would request now the Vice Chancellor of Ashoka University, Professor Malabika Sarkar, to please come on, and Professor Sarkar will also moderate the discussion and the Q&A after Professor Singh has made his opening remarks. Malabika, over to you, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It is a great privilege for me to have the opportunity to welcome to this conference Professor D.P. Singh, Chairman, University Grants Commission of India. Before the chairmanship of the UGC, Professor Singh was a director of NAC from 2015 to 2017, and the transparency and objectivity he brought to assessment is greatly valued by all. Professor Singh has provided leadership as Vice Chancellor of 3 universities, including the iconic Banaras Hindu University. He has played a leadership role in multiple higher education apex bodies. His vision of higher education is informed by his wide-ranging national and international experience. So at this critical point in global history, we look forward to his keynote address on reinventing Indian universities. Professor Singh.
Namaste. Respected Sinhaji, founder and trustee, Ashoka University, Honorable Vice Chancellor of Ashoka University, Professor Malabika Sarkar, other distinguished speakers, Honorable Vice Chancellors, Principals and Directors of various universities and institutions, my friends from academia, ladies and gentlemen. I am glad to be with you this evening in this Republic of Letters conference. I deeply appreciate the idea of recreating the concept of Republic of Letters by bringing together the higher education leaders and intellectuals of India on a virtual platform like this. It's my firm belief that creating such a virtual community will go a long way in further improving the quality of higher education by learning from each other's experience. Friends, The emergence of new and fast-growing fields are disrupting the ways in which we learn and work. A wide range of new technological breakthroughs, such as artificial intelligence, blockchain, machine learning, advanced robotics, Internet of Things, cloud computing, gene editing technologies, synthetic biology, drug delivery, 3D printing, smart convergence of IT, that is information technology, BT, that is biotechnology, CT, that is communication technology, and NT, that is nanotechnology, have affected the present trends. As such, major changes are expected in the labor market globally. Now, addressing these challenges requires reforms in India's higher education system. The technology-induced skill gap, which the Indian economy is facing across different sectors, is bound to widen with the current higher education system. The institutes of higher learning should redesign the course curriculum to be more industry relevant by understanding key market transitions and the technological advancements. This would enable the country to bridge the skill gap in the labor market and create a workforce demanded by the companies in the digital era. The emergence of new transformative technologies creates major opportunities as well as challenges for societies. The technological gap widens, largely explaining the development divide between developed and developing countries. There is no guarantee that these technological progress will be aligned with the most pressing needs of humanity, and they are eradicating poverty and hunger, reducing inequality, generating shared prosperity, and building resilience against climate change. The technological progress brings unprecedented ecological change and disturbances in natural ecosystems and biodiversity. Here, I am reminded of an important saying of the former President of India, a great teacher, and the former Vice Chancellor of the Banaras Hindu University, Dr. Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan. And I quote, "The aim of education is not the acquisition of information, although important, or acquisition of technical skills, though essential in modern society, but the development of that bent of mind, that attitude of reason, that spirit of democracy, which will make us responsible citizens." This again expects much from higher education. Friends, our higher education must be of high quality, no doubt. It should be competitive, it should be relevant, it should be value-based, and must produce graduates who are employable and have traits of entrepreneurship, globally competitive, and at the same time, deeply rooted in Indianness. Education is not the learning of facts, but the training of the mind to think. These were the famous words of the immortalized scientist Albert Einstein. The Indian education landscape is in the process of transforming into a more targeted, learner-oriented model. As a quality mandate, we in UGC appreciate the very need to do away the rote learning and replace it with the learning outcome-based curriculum framework that encourages high expectations for success while celebrating individual differences and learning styles. Education and learning need to be pivotal around the preferences of the learners. Moving ahead, It will be crucial to design innovative solutions to accelerate the performance of the higher education sector, to meet market demands, improve access to students, and drive efficiencies in operations. Other student-centric Jeevan Kaushal curriculum for life skills and taking the students' progression after completion of course shall help the students not only in academics, but even beyond the university life. The possibility of transforming into an experiential university must be explored, where students alternate between classroom learning and work related to their field of study. India has the demographic age, a young talent pool that is estimated to become the world's largest by 2030. Equity, access, and quality have always been central to the policy making in UGC. Taking recourse to new technology can make a difference to the challenge of both numbers and distances. While equity and access are already taken care of to a large extent, quality in higher education is still a cause of concern, and we all need to do a lot more in this direction. We have begun to explore the benefits of new pedagogical approaches assisted by digital technologies for transforming the conventional learning environments. The faculty-centric schemes like adoption of ICT-based learning tools for effective teaching, which includes SWAYAM, which includes SWAYAM Prabha, which includes EPG Pathshala, which includes National Digital Library, which includes Shodh Ganga and Shodh Sindhu and Vidwan also. And then learning process and Guru Dakshata, faculty induction program for newly appointed teachers, and another initiative of MHRD and UGC's ARPIT, that is annual refresher program in teaching for the existing faculty members. These initiatives will qualitatively improve the competence of our teachers. Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore once said that, and I quote, "The highest education is that which does not merely give us information, but makes our life in harmony with all existence." The UGC schemes, which we have developed recently, like Moolya Prabha, which are the guidelines for inculcation of human values and professional ethics, and Satat, which is a framework for eco-friendly and sustainable campus development, will go a long way to establish values in the minds of our youth and also development of environment-friendly campuses in India. Friends, when we talk about education institutions to become future ready and plan for reinventing Indian universities, which is the topic of discussion today, we can look at addressing the issues of why to reinvent, and what and how to reinvent. But before we address these issues, it is much more important for us to ascertain what not to reinvent, but to reinforce which is already there. I feel that there are a few things which generally do not change in our lives. They are our values, they are our beliefs, they are our virtues. I firmly believe that the core values or the foundations will continue to serve the purpose of education, which remains value-based quality education for holistic development, creating responsible citizens, not only responsible Indian citizens. Human values and ethical practices will continue to be the underlying principles for all walks of human life and will be the guiding spirit for the education institutions. I think this needs to be firmly reinforced. Now let us look at the issues related to reinvention. I think the reasons for why to reinvent are very obvious. Future is forever evolving, dynamic, unforeseen, unknown, unfolding unprecedented complexities, challenges, and opportunities. All these and many more factors are leading us to reinvent. I would now focus more on what and how to reinvent. The reinvention of Indian universities has to be done in terms of developing an enabling ecosystem, which is prepared and sufficient to sensitize and respond to the disruptive forces. The ecosystem would call for reinventing many areas, but I would limit myself only to 5 key components, which I feel should be health, competencies, research, operationalization, and collaboration. I would like to briefly touch upon these areas of intervention now. The first and foremost component is health. Holistic health will remain the primary concern and the focus of all institutions. It would require physical, mental, social, emotional, psychological, and spiritual health of all. There will be a need for wider awareness, sensitization, facilitation for lifestyle and behavioral modifications to remain healthy holistically. That holistic health is very important. MHRD and UGC have taken some initiatives in this regard, such as Fit India campaign, Manodarpan for mental health, yoga for well-being, and many more. Various guidelines and advisories about fitness and mental health have also been issued from time to time by the UGC. The second component I would like to talk about is competencies. About new realities, new normal would require a new set of competencies and skills for both teachers as well as students to prepare for the future, particularly in this COVID-19 pandemic spread. This is very much required. For teachers, it would involve changing role and capacity building. In the changing times, teachers will have to assume greater responsibilities in terms of mentoring, in terms of guiding and facilitating the students. In addition, they will have to sharpen and develop new abilities along with scholarly competencies related to knowledge and research. Changing times would require a new set of skills, including integration of technology in teaching, learning and research, blended and innovative pedagogy, and career planning. For students, it would call for new learnings and new ways of learning. UNESCO has already suggested 4 pillars of education for lifelong learning, and they are learning to know, learning to do, learning to live together, and learning to be. In addition to their domain knowledge and technical skills, students would be required to master cognitive and creative skills, life skills, and future jobs related skill set. They must also enhance their emotional intelligence, their social intelligence, and also spiritual intelligence, along with artificial intelligence, and remain lifelong learners. This would enable them to face the realities and challenges of the future and emerge as winners in all situations. Friends, now I will come to the third component, that is research. Emerging realities would demand greater focus on applied research and collaborative research. I strongly feel that research should be locally need-based, socially relevant, and nationally important and globally significant. Research must aim at making the life better for everyone, to humanity, and contribute to the sustainable development. The fourth component is operationalization. Disruptive and converging technologies will demand newer ways of operationalization. This operative system will be much more responsive, integrative, and adaptable. The preparedness and readiness of the institutions in terms of their abilities to sense and respond to the emerging requirements will be the key element. Technology will be the prime enabler for this change. Technology-enabled teaching, learning, and governance. Technology will be at the core of all the institutional activities. We will also witness adoption of blended learning and online education very soon. The fifth component, which is also very significant in today's time, is collaboration and networking. Future will further strengthen our belief and call for coexistence. It will require a collaborative approach for teaching, learning, research, training, internship, placement, etc., etc. Collaboration and networking with institutions, with industry, social groups, NGOs, alumni, and other stakeholders would be much needed in all our academic ventures. COVID times have taught us the reality and benefits of collaboration and networking for bringing solutions for human life and planet Earth. Friends, to conclude, I firmly believe that our universities should contribute to the country in becoming the most competitive and dynamic knowledge-based economy in the world, capable of sustainable economic growth with more and better jobs and greater social cohesion and national integration. I congratulate the organizers and the Ashoka University and Harappa Education for choosing this relevant theme to redefine the future of higher education in India. I am sure that points emerging from deliberations will contribute in better understanding of the challenges and provide a roadmap for reinventing Indian universities. With these words, I wish you all good health and happiness. Thank you very much, and Jai Hind.
Thank you very much, Professor Singh, for this very insightful talk, which I'm sure everyone will take away a great deal from it. Thank you very much for balancing ethics and value on the one hand and technology on the other. That is the road, of course, that we all have to take going forward, and it's very important to keep that in mind. Thank you for alerting us about that. The number of questions that have come up, and we'd be very happy if you could spare a little time to answer some of those.
I will certainly try to answer.
Thank you. One of the questions that I find being asked by those who are listening to us is, are there any specific policy changes envisioned by UGC because of the current COVID challenge? And together with that, perhaps related, is another question I find, which is, are there any plans the UGC has for faculty training policy in view of the current situation? Your thoughts on that?
The opening question is very, very important and pertinent, particularly during these COVID-19 pandemic times, which are the challenging times, which are the difficult times, which are the unprecedented times. And you have very rightly said this is the requires several changes at the policy level, at the delivery implementation level also. We at UGC, in consultation with the MHRD, have thought of it, and particularly because the online education or e-learning has become the need of the hour. And here I just want to make a mention that earlier we had regulation which came in 2018 related to online programs and the courses. And prior to that, in 2017, UGC came out with the ODR regulations. So, and before that, there was a regulation related to SWAYAM, and in 2016, the SWAYAM regulation provided for having up to 20% online content with the face-to-face teaching in the universities. And then this ODL, with ODL programs also, with conventional programs also, 20% online. Then after that, this full-fledged online degree program regulation related came in 2018, but it is a recent phenomenon. But because of the COVID-19 pandemic, now we are promoting online education, and for that we have revisited the regulations related to ODL and also online. And we constituted a committee to integrate both these regulations, because it was found that there are certain communities, there are certain infrastructural issues, faculty-related issues, and human resource-related issues which can be pulled together and on the campuses, and then the university can take help of conducting online and ODL programs. So, but that committee we constituted to relook into it, and they have submitted their report, and soon this integrated version of the online and ODL regulations will be there. We are thinking of facilitating online education and to make it more student-friendly and stakeholder-friendly, and to provide opportunities to more universities. Because you may be aware that recently there was an announcement by the government of India under the Atmanirbhar Bharat, this PM E-Vidya program, which also talks about facilitating 100 top universities of the country for online education. Before that also, during last year, there was a budget speech which also mentioned about the promotion of online education. So we are working on it, and certainly, as you have already mentioned, that it will require capacity building. It would require capacity building, and also training of the teachers. And therefore, side by side, we are also facilitating our human resource development centers so that they can organize, to begin with, during this post-COVID phase, some online programs for capacity building of the teachers. And then the institutions themselves have to relook in terms of the facilitation of online programs, in terms of having infrastructure facilities related to digital initiatives on the campuses. So this is what we are thinking, and soon, because there are certain processes involved in the framing of the regulation, soon the country will have a new integrated version of ODL and online regulations, which will facilitate more universities to start the programs related to online education. But at the same time, under the SWAYAM regulation also, the commission has thought of it, and we are going to increase from 20% to 40% online content along with the face-to-face teaching or the ODL programs, which will also, and that would be for all the types of universities, which are now about 1,000 universities in the country. So any university can take up that online content. These are some new initiatives. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. So, earlier we have all benefited from the UGC's refresher courses for college teachers. It was a very good program. Yeah. So in the current situation that we are all in, perhaps an online version of refresher courses that are aimed at capacity building for online teaching Is that one of the things that you have in mind?
Yes, yes, certainly. And I mentioned during my initial remarks about the ARPIT. ARPIT, yes, that is annual refresher program for teaching. Actually, that we started that MHRD started last year only. And under that, that anywhere, anytime type of courses are available in the form of MOOCs, and the teachers can take them. And UGC, through a order, has also taken a decision that this are under the course RP, that would be equivalent to one refresher program, and that will be added into the career progression of the teachers. But now more focus would be on organizing programs through online mode of learning. Yes, ma'am.
Yes. And the point that you made about research, about it being local, social, national, and international, very, very important point. And so I have a question arising out of that has come to us, which says, how is this going to be furthered by UGC? Are there new policies in the process on this?
I'm already, we launched one scheme, that is STRIDE, a scheme for India's developing, a scheme for transdisciplinary research for India's developing economy. And during in that scheme, this whatever word I have used, this is to promote the socially relevant, locally need-based, and nationally important and globally significant type of researches. And we felt that in most of the institutions, sometimes there is a repetitive type of researches on the chosen subjects or limited subjects. So there is no need of interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary researches. And the focus should be on that, not only on a repetitive type of researches, which are generally supervisor oriented. So that is the focus that we have already launched that scheme.
I think one of the thoughts in the minds of those who are asking questions is this, that in the post-COVID era, once we have recovered from this, is blended learning here to stay?
Yes, blended through this actually amendment in the SWAYAM regulation, which will be facilitating up to 40% of the online content, online courses, along with the face-to-face teaching. That would be the actually blended mode of learning, and that will be the need of the hour also. And we are in favor of having blended mode of learning. Regarding this research also, ma'am, I just want to tell that this National Research Foundation, this was there, and Government of India has already started working on this, and under the leadership of Principal Scientific Advisor to Honorable Prime Minister, Dr. Vijay Raghavan, the work has already started. This is to pool all resources and ministries together, and to think in terms of the priorities of the country and also the globally significant resources. So there's a national focus would be on these aspects through the National Research Foundation. There is also mention about National Research Foundation in the National Policy on Education draft.
Yes. If there are two other questions that I could ask you.
Sure, sure.
One is to do with reducing the skills gap required to onboard, all of these platforms. And you mentioned, and this is where the question comes from, you mentioned the need for reaching out to industry. Yeah, so how do you see industry and higher education working with each other at this point in time?
It's very much required, and UGC has also developed a document called Social and Industry Connect also, and we are also engaged through various ways with the industry associations, CII, FICCI, SOCM, Commerce, etc., and other organizations which are there related to the representing industries. We are having continuous dialogue with them. But at the same time, at UGC, we have some schemes which are promoting skill development and education related to vocational programs. And one of them is having a VVOC, Bachelor of Vocational Program, then Master's Vocational Programs also. Then we have a scheme called Community Colleges Scheme, which is also related to running of these skill development programs. Then we also have Pandit Deendayal Upadhyay Kaushal Vikas Kendras, which are in several institutions, and UGC gets grants for these programs also. We are also having dialogue with the Ministry of Skills and Entrepreneurship to have in future some apprenticeship embedded programs also. And in National Policy of Education draft that also emphasizes on industry connect and skill related development of the learners.
Thank you. At this point of time in a country like India, with its many universities, public universities, state, central, private, deemed universities, all of that, it must be a huge responsibility for the University Grants Commission to manage the current crisis. So thank you very much for all that you do and for all that you shared with us at this conference. We've all benefited greatly. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Sinaji, and everybody.
Thank you, sir. बहुत-बहुत धन्यवाद. Thank you for coming.
आपका भी बहुत-बहुत धन्यवाद. मुझे बहुत अच्छा लगा आप लोगों के साथ बात करके. Thank you so much.
करीब 100 लोग आए थे सेशन के लिए सर, between the Zoom session and the YouTube. So a lot of interest in your session. Thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Malabika. Thank you, Professor Sarkar, for chairing the session. Thank you so much. Let me just get started on the sessions for the day as we go to our panel. We are running a little bit behind, but we should be able to catch up. I'm delighted to introduce our 3 panels for the day. On track 1, we will be starting shortly on the connecting the dots, keeping professional education relevant, and I'll come back to that. On track 2, we are doing a session on new skills for a new workplace. To join the track 2 session, you will have to go in the chat box and there is a link which you can click and that will take you to track 2. It's starting now. Similarly, there's a new session starting on track 3, which is crisis as an opportunity leading in the pandemic. That's on track 3. Again, the link is in your chat box. You do need a password to get into that panel because it's by invitation only. You all know your password. It was the same password as yesterday. I'm very excited to introduce our first panel for the day. And I can ask NANDITA Abraham, Dr. Thomas Garvey, Professor John Thakara, Geethanjali, Dr. GEETHA Narayanan to please turn on their videos and join us. Thank you all for joining us today. Our panel discussion today is going to be chaired by NANDITA Abraham, where we've decided to focus on professional education and how this is going to remain relevant in times like this. NANDITA, I will quickly introduce everyone so that you don't have to spend the time doing that, and then you can take it away. I thought I had to introduce NANDITA first. Yes, I can't forget to do that. NANDITA is the president of Pearl Academy. She's a member of the FICCI Higher Education Committee. She's a member of the Executive Committee of the International Foundation for Fashion Technology Institutes and a member of the CII National Committee of Design. We are very fortunate to have Dr. Thomas Garvey join us. He's a board member of the World Design Organization, which is the largest organization of its kind in the world. They, in fact, did their assembly in Hyderabad last year. I was somewhat involved in that, so welcome. Associate Professor and former Director of the School of Industrial Design at Carleton University. He has a bachelor's from the Pratt Institute as well as a PhD from the University of Tokyo. Professor John Takara, I hope I pronounced that right, sir, Senior Fellow of the Royal College of Art, Adjunct Professor, School of Visual Arts at Tongji University, author of How to Thrive in the Next Economy, Designing Tomorrow's World Today. We should have picked that as the title for this session. Curator, Doors of Perception Conference. Geethanjali, JB, she's the founding CEO of the Himalayan Institute of Alternatives, which we all know about from some famous movies and so on, if I'm not mistaken. Founder of the Helios Books, former director of Wind Force Management Services Private Limited, and former chairperson of AUM Hospitals. This is a slightly bigger panel and you have more time. So we also have Dr. GEETHA Narayanan joining us, founder director of the Shrishti Manipal Institute of Art, Design and Technology, chair, culture, habitat and sustainable development at UNESCO, visionary designer, place talks, and a principal investigator of the Project Vision Research Collective. Nandita, this is over to you. I've been joking today with my team that today is Women's Day at the Republic of Letters. We have more women session chairs today than men. We have more women panelists today than men. And we have many women moderators and one woman keynote to close the session. So over to you. Like you know, you have a slightly longer session, so take your time. The last thing I will say is that there's been a bit of a problem and I have to jump on to another track. So I won't be there in the end, but thank you very much for doing this. Somebody else will be there to see you off. But thanks so much and enjoy the session.
Thank you, Pramath. And we have an hour? Yeah.
Yes. It's 4:42 now, so maybe by 4:35 if you can finish. Yeah.
All right. Okay, super. Thank you, everyone. I have to tell you how excited I am. And I hope everybody here is excited too, because you will never in a real face-to-face conference get such an amazing panel. So thank you, each one of you, for being here. From Canada, Thomas, good morning to you.
Morning.
From France, John, it's still brunch or early morning. And GEETHA from Bangalore and Geethanjali from Chennai. So we have another maybe 380 people in the room. So Devika, can we have a poll to see who these people are? Okay, there are 2 questions. Everybody can answer this. We have like a minute. So quickly punch in who you are, a design academic or an academic leader or a professional. And also, what do you think the impact of COVID-19 will be on design, creativity, and innovation? So I can see the numbers pouring in. I'm not sure whether everybody here, everybody in the audience can. I think the panelists can, but we're going to see it soon. I hope you've all had a good session this afternoon. The first session was by the chairman of UGC, and I think the last 2 or 3 days have been, last 2 days have been really interesting. Today we're going to round it up with some magnificent sessions, and I think, are we ready to publish the poll, Devika?
Almost ready, Nandita.
Oh, great. Oh, you're still here with us, Pramath. See, I knew that you wanted to be a part of this group.
Over 200 people have voted, by the way. More than half the audience has voted. You'll get the results.
Okay, so I think you can see the results right now. So most people in this room, and this is for John, GEETHA, Geethanjali, Thomas, most people in this room are academics, but not necessarily design academics. They're academic leaders, professionals, and how lovely some students and some people who are just interested in knowing what's going on here. And wow, a whopping 98% of them feel that design, creativity, and innovation is going to become more important post this pandemic. Now, let's see whether the panel really agrees with that. Okay. Welcome to today's discussion. It's really nice to know who we're talking with. This is an important discussion, and I think we have just the right people here to share their point of view and help us take this conversation earlier. Today, we are witnessing in many ways a transformative movement in human history in the form of this pandemic. For each of you panelists, I would like to know what each of you have been thinking and doing during this time, and how you see the pandemic impacting professional or design education. Like I told you, you have 5 minutes each. I am not going to use a timer, but I'm really interested in knowing that what are the changes that you're seeing, and how do you see this impacting design education in the future? As a special request, and you'll be happy to know that the request has come from the gentleman on this panel. We're going to let the ladies go first. So Geetha, over to you. Would you share your thoughts, please?
It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to participate in the conference and to see my friends on the panel, and you too. Real pleasure to be with all of you, with Thomas, John, and Geethanjali. I have been thinking about this question a lot ever since you posed it to us. And I think that the title, which is Connect the Dots, I'm trying to think about what I was thinking about by connecting the past, the present, and the future, you know. And was I thinking about it just simplistically in terms of location, points of time, or as destinations, end products that we're looking at? Or are we looking at it as we looked at the General Assembly in Hyderabad, where Thomas and you were also there, where we looked at it as a sequence of Industry 1.0 to 4.0 and Design 1.0 to 4.0. And most of those conversations are almost irrelevant today, because we really can't afford now to think about things as destinations, as places or points or targets that we want to meet. We have to remove that kind of mindset. And in order to understand why we need to move beyond that, I'm just going to share a little example with you. And I've used this often before, so if there are people in the audience and saying I'm repeating a story, I ask for that privilege today. One of the things that we all like to do is copy. And I started with the benefit of working with mimeography machines in the United States in the 60s and 70s. Then it turned to cyclostyling machines, where we turned paper around and got carbon all over ourselves. And later on, we brought these huge, big Xerox copiers into the design school. And later on, we got the scanner. And then the whole design process of miniaturization happened. And within our world, we now have not just even a camera, but just one device. And that one device kind of helps us to do many things. But above all, it helps us make a copy of something that we want almost instantly. Now, when you think about what is important in the time of a pandemic, and what I think that it's important for other people to think, is that the device is not important. The technology is irrelevant, because tomorrow there'll be a new device or a new technology. But what is the relationship is in what is human about it. And the humanness about this is our urge to communicate, our urge to copy, to share, not just to own. And in many things that I have been thinking about the last few weeks and months, I'm trying to think of something that is timeless. I'm trying to think of something that is enduring. And I'm trying to think of something that is essential. And I think that we need to start thinking of just that if our need is only to communicate, share, and make a reproduction of something, we can do that in many different ways, and we don't need to fall apart. We don't have to do it. And that is my connection between the past and the future. It is connecting the dots, but it's also the fact that the search is now for that which is enduring, essential, and really timeless.
Super, lovely. Geethanjali, will you take that on? Geethanjali, you're on mute.
Yeah, thank you so much, Geetha, for that nice opening, because I had similar thoughts, but I'll go deeper into them now. Yes, connecting the dots, as Geetha said, is connecting past, present, and future, connecting geographically, connecting through time, space, and connecting approaches, you know, the disciplines which have become so kind of specialized. And here I would like to more talk in the context of India. What I have been thinking during this pandemic is how much it is important for us to think originally, you know, to think more contextually. And since this has a component of design education, I want to take an example of, let's say, the clothes which are celebrities wear to international festivals like Cannes and others, which are like copies of their Hollywood counterparts. You know, we see Deepika Padukone's and all these people wear, you know, what Shakira or Kate Hudson have worn. How about showcasing, being original, you know, showcasing what India stands for, celebrating that diversity, you know, that context. So being original and being bringing about what we have to reflect our cultural context is something that really I've been thinking during these times, because as you know, globalization can come to a perfect standstill in such times. And somehow globalization, which has come to mean a kind of a monoculture, needs to be taken a rethink at, you know, can globalization be a celebration of cultural diversity? You know, in design, in other education, even in engineering education, do we need to just do AI, what Silicon Valley is doing, or we need to think what in India today is the need of the hour, and therefore indigenize our technologies and you know, come up with solutions which are contextual. This has been something that I've...
Lovely, Geethanjali. John, it's over to you. How do you see these thoughts and other things happening really impacting design education, design careers, creative careers, or careers in general? You're on mute, John. Yeah.
I guess it's not such a big surprise that we've come to a similar conclusion in terms of, I think for the whole of our lives, we've discussed scenarios of the future, utopias, manifestos, and we've written books and given talks about what things should be like. Now, within a few weeks, it's for real, and it's no longer a kind of academic discussion or a discussion between opposing views. We're all in this rather unsafe boat. So that's my sort of first point, is that anything I think that I want to do or that others should do has to take into account that millions upon millions of people, their whole lives have been thrown up in the air, and we have to work with them and not just kind of think, as Geetha said just now, for another few months about speculative futures. Just one of the connections I think we have to make that as often sounds academic, connection to place as an alternative, but not as a radical alternative to globalization. We're all stuck in one way or another where we were when the lockdown happened. And to me, it's been a revelation just how little I know about my own place, where I've been living this place for 19 years, meeting people I didn't know, learning about ecosystems, discovering institutions, meeting people in my own street that live 10 doors away that I've never met before in 19 years. So to me, it's been just an epiphany that localization is not about getting smaller, it's about getting deeper. And that's, to me, one of the fundamental points about what design and professional education has to be about, is how you connect with your place, not in a kind of touristic sense, but understanding your place deeply. The second thing, and this is connected, is that in order to look for how your place is going to flourish in the future, we can't do this on our own. Whatever our subject or discipline is, we need to work with other, not just professionals, but people with other forms of knowledge. I mean, like the care workers, that all around the world we've discovered that carers have incredible skills and knowledge, which is not the same as academic knowledge or like high-level qualifications, but the whole world would come to an immediate halt without their work. So that's the second thing, is we need to say, who knows about caring? Who knows about looking after carers or helping carers to thrive? Because that's a pretty big part of what we all have to do. And then finally, I think that in terms of connecting, it's more, as again, we all three of us said the same thing, connecting to our past as well as to some imagined future. And this brings me back to why India has been so central to my life, is going to India, I've learned about traditions and cultures that at the time people said, oh, it's exotic and that's sort of old fashioned. Now it's really super red hot. The obvious example being bicycle commerce. I was talking to people just this week in Vienna, in Austria and in Australia, who are all saying we need to turn our cities into bicycle commerce cities. And I said, yeah, by the way, go to India, which they've done that for like generations. And we had a website that did 15 years ago called Velo Walla, which has hundreds of examples of how Indian informal traders have an incredible economy that has been ignored and neglected for so long. So connecting the dots to our place, but also connecting the dots to our past.
So, sorry, John, you were talking about how industry has changed in some way, and you were giving an example of Alibaba, and in the same context of this localization or place. Would you like to share that? Yeah. That
indeed, because I've been doing a fair amount of work in China the last 2 years with Tongji University and Professor Low about how to reconnect the urban and the rural. And this is one of those subjects which in Europe, and I guess maybe in India, is a slightly kind of hypothetical discussion, because all the expectation is that everybody will move to the city. Not so in China, where Alibaba, which is a gigantic company, has started to make an infrastructure that connects farmers directly with people in the city in a program called Taobao, live streaming, so that if you're growing mangoes or you're growing fruit of some kind, you can then talk to the people in the city who might buy it there and then on your phone. And then the person in the city says, okay, I'll take 10 kilos. And the system kind of brings you those to your house. I've had that discussion about connecting farmers to the city for 25 years. In China, they just do it, bang. It's one of those revolutionary acts that could just happen.
Super, thank you. Thomas, what about your place in Canada? How do you see things changing in terms of careers, in terms of education?
Yes, well, first of all, I should say thank you for the invitation to be part of this very inspirational group. I'm really excited to be here. I'm excited about this topic. I want to begin by, I think, acknowledging that what I think about every day is I think about the great suffering that is going on in the world today because of this. I think of the people who have been affected by the virus itself. I think of those who may be dealing with food shortages. I think of those who might be dealing with a lack of employment. And we need to continue to recognize that as our highest priority, that there are people out there that are suffering. At the same time, as a designer, I have to say I'm extremely excited about what's happening historically right now. John mentioned time. We're going through in a matter of months what we might have taken many years, if not a decade, to go through. When we talk about things like online education, other things and technologies and lifestyles, we're actually in such a time of rapid acceleration. We're learning very quickly, and we're making mistakes very quickly, and we don't have the time that we might have had otherwise to explore. So what's happening is I think we're seeing, in a very healthy way, I think we're seeing a great sort of period of destruction, of rebuilding, of loss of models that didn't make sense anymore, of ways of thinking that we just dragged along with us, and now we just can't afford to. So I see it as a great time of opportunity. And I think in particular that's good for the creative people and everybody in general, but creative people, designers in particular, because we do tend to thrive with ambiguity. We tend to thrive in times of challenge. And I think it's really, Geetha also mentioned the enduring and the essential. I think every one of us is realizing every day what's more important to us and what's less important to us. I really like the notion too of the local and the global, because we've all become such global people through these technologies. We're sitting here talking, having a wonderful conversation around the world, but at the same time, as John said, I'm getting to know my local community, and I'm starting to find out where's the food growing, where can I get access to things I never thought about before. So in space and time, we're kind of global, but we've also become extremely local, which I think is really an interesting juxtaposition.
Even sorry, carry on.
Please.
No, go ahead. I was going to take that. I will do.
I was just sort of thinking, bring it to a closing point, to bring it to about education and careers and how it impacts the professional life. I think we're seeing something truly fundamental. Right now, we have tens of thousands of students here in Canada and probably hundreds of thousands of students around the world who are graduating with no place to go. All the jobs that they would have gone to are not there. All the internships have dried up. And so there's a huge shift between, in our case in Canada, I would say 75% of students or young people would have left and joined more traditional corporate routes, more established companies. And a very small percentage might have become entrepreneurs and innovators. And we're seeing a complete reversal of that now, where young people are being forced to become much more entrepreneurial, to create their own paths. And so I think what's really important there is that we consider the idea of identity capital and how young people today must, in a very quick way and a very unique way, identify for themselves what they really need to be doing in the world today. And we need to look to them. Of course, every generation we look to young people to lead us. But I think at this time we're again doing it in such an accelerated path that's going to be very interesting. And I finally like to make a comment on the urban and the rural that you brought up a moment ago. I just saw the statistic the other day that approximately 40% of the real estate in the financial district in Manhattan in New York is empty. And so you see that companies, you probably saw that Twitter decided they're not going to bring their staff back. And for many in the world, it's not working, but for many in the world, it is working to be at a distance. And so suddenly the need to move to cities, the need for so many people to have moved to those downtown cores primarily for employment opportunities, that need might be challenged as we move forward. And of course, we move to urban environments for more than just work. We move for social reasons. We move for reasons of access. But one of the prime reasons why we move to urban environments is because of employment, and that's going to change. So that might breathe new life into the more rural contexts again, which would be a healthy thing, I think. So those are my first thoughts when I think of what it's doing to our what the impact is.
Thank you. I think that's really interesting, and I like that idea of identity capital because. Like you were saying, moving from rural to urban, a lot of people move to study also. And these kind of changes may not be as possible, or maybe then one needs to create a new way of education where people can have access to education or better educational opportunities even closer to home. And that's really what's going to make the rural areas or the non-metro areas grow in some ways. Okay, fabulous. Let's hear from the audience. Devika, do we have another poll? So we have 2 questions for the audience, and these are 2 questions that we're going to take next. Okay, so the first one is that, is there a role for design, or are we just like, overselling ourselves that design can solve problems, and what has design been doing about it all this time? And the second one is about digital education, because you are all educators. And so do you think it's possible in India? Do you think it's possible in all areas? I mean, what about art, theater? Can there be digital education? Or should we just like leave all that behind and as soon as possible get back to where we were? And let's get it started. So I think that this is an opportunity for us as a panel. So thank you everybody who's voting, because this is an opportunity for us as a panel to learn from you, because everybody here at this conference is really got so much of experience. I know I have an amazing panel here, but if we added on the years of experience and ideas of the people in the audience, I think that really takes us to super. Maybe another couple of seconds if you can quickly vote. Maybe they're difficult questions. The first one's answer seems to be quite clear, that the audience feels that yes, design is a multidisciplinary problem-solving approach that can be applied in diverse contexts. And about digital infrastructure in India, where I think we're a little iffy about it because maybe we feel it's inadequate, maybe it is inadequate, we don't have enough of digital literacy. And it's quite interesting to see that 20% of the people say that it is possible in areas like design, art, theater, where creativity is involved to take this ahead. Okay, you can share the results. There you go. Okay, thank you. Okay, so going to my next question, and maybe you can choose which order you want to go in. The days of learning we've heard over the last 2 days, and of course over the last few years, the days of learning or working in silos are over. Like you said, that there is so much of real estate in New York that is empty. Whose problem is that? So we really have to work at or connecting the dots. So can you look ahead and see what changes we need to make in the way we construct education? I mean, if the problems are those which are multidisciplinary, how do we connect education, and how does design education play a role, or does design education play a role in that? Who wants to go first? Geetha, you have to put on your mic and yeah.
I'll go. Okay. I think it's amazing that amongst all the panelists, everybody is building on ideas, and I'm just looking at my notes in answer to this, and I'm now going to be building on what John and Thomas and Gitanjali are saying as well. I think, and I'm going to the poll, I think this, the 2% or whatever it is looked at design as a thing of aesthetics. It's a common problem within at least the culture that we have here, is that design is seen as fashion design or something that's lifestyle oriented and is about making something a pretty picture. And I think that is a problem that we have to deal with, but not on this panel. So I'm going to just address to that. When thinking about this question, I was thinking about, the question is really about what dots do we connect if we are thinking about education. And I'm not going to call it design education because I think that word itself is problematic for me. But I think that we are trying to create professionals who have competencies, or a word that John used, competencies or capabilities which enable them to make a creative impact on whatever they're taking, whether that is problem solving or whether it's problem seeking or whether it's imploding something and looking at it from all aspects. It's about giving somebody a certain mindset of how you actually look at the world. Now, what are the dots are we connecting when we want to try and connect education here? Are we trying to connect an institution to industry and an industry to a job? This is the kind of hypothesis that most people think is very essential and that they have to do it. And that the only work of an institution, and in now particularly if we're talking about making a creative impact, you only make an impact if you have the creative industries or any industry working. It results in jobs and it works in a kind of economic outcome that can be measured and put out there. I don't agree with that. I think that we have arrived at this destination in time. It's our destiny to be here in 2020 when we knew what was happening, but we didn't have the courage to stop it. And the dots that we have to connect now is in the nature of connecting forms of knowledge to the nature of practice, because essentially what we're talking about are forms of practice, a professional who has a practice and who can work and think with a mindset in a particular way. And I think that in the future, this practice has to, as John pointed out, and Thomas also built on it, has to be local. And Gitanjali used the word original, but was also making the same point. That if we are looking at connecting the dots, we cannot say industry is our destination and jobs are our essential outcome. We can't promise that. We are having the whitewater, rapids ride of our lives. We know we will be tossed off the thing at any moment onto the rocks. So, but what we need to know is that there are different forms of knowledge. And when John was talking about the caregivers, I was saying, there he goes, you know, caregivers have a certain skill set and a form of knowledge. A gardener has a form of knowledge. A historian has a form of knowledge. And why is that not important to design education? All of them are important because we're talking about creating the nature of practice. And when we are talking about the nature of practice, I don't think it is my job here in India or my mission here in India to prepare work for somebody in Canada or in Manhattan or in China. I think it is enough if I decide to look around and see what is proximate, what is achievable, what is relevant, and even if it has a very short impact-making lifespan, that's okay, because we can find something else to make an impact if we have the creative competence and the capability that we're talking about. So we have to go away from the one-size-fits-all mindset, which is what the industrial mechanism has given us, that we are all on this relentless conveyor belt like modern times, and everybody's just, every design school is just stamping out degrees. I don't think a degree has anything to do with design. So 3 points that I'm making. It's not connecting the dots between institution, industry, and jobs. It is about connecting the jobs between forms of knowledge that we value and may not have brought into academies, and that which is in academies, the nature of practice, and to make them proximate to you. Now, I'm not using the word local because local is a place-based kind of thing. Proximate could be proximate to self. And I think that this is the most important point that we are going to look at. We're going to have to look at our inner worlds, right? And if we're looking at design education or creative education, it is how we're looking inside ourselves and our practice. And so local is part of it, but the self is also part of it. I do have some more to say, but I'll stop there and let other people have a go at it.
Who wants to go next? Thomas or Gitanjali? Huh?
Yeah.
We're following the same order.
Yeah, so I think in India, I will focus my discussion to India today and education in India today. And we suffer from these two hangovers. One is a post-industrial hangover, which is more of a global phenomenon. But in addition to that, India also has a post-colonial hangover. So I feel that to design, first of all, yes, design is the beginning of the imagination. You know, it is the beginning of creating something truly. So design mindset can play a big role in designing the education of tomorrow. And professional education, we are focusing on right now, has to have some of these things. For instance, one is, yes, I agree, more than local, we would say contextual. So by contextual, we mean contextual in space, where I am from, and learn from there, learn that context. You know, it is contextual in time, which is the zeitgeist, you know, the spirit of the times, and also contextual in experience. And here is where our indigenous wisdom comes in. And I'll give you an example, like 70% of India lives in rural India. And out of that, 50% live in mud homes. But even after 70 years of independence, in our country, we don't have a school of mud architecture, you know. And that is what in the Himalayan Institute of Alternatives, our first school is the School of Earth Architecture, because there cannot be a habitat, you know, you cannot be more intimate with your habitat when you're using the very earth, you know, of which you're digging the foundation. And this entire cement building, this entire monoculture is not a very smart design, because in Ladakh, where it is -30, the mud buildings that we make keep the buildings at +20 when it is -30 outside without any artificial heating. So that is using the local resources, local interventions, local inventions to solve local problems. And yes, by local, we mean contextual. So first is to make education contextual. The second point is to make it experiential. Today, it is completely paper knowledge. It is just mind to mind. Whereas there cannot be any education which is just mind to mind unless it passes through the hands and the heart. So there has to be practice that has to become part of the education, and a heart, you know, of empathy, sympathy, of compassion, of the whole problem we have today with disconnect with nature, climate change problems is because there is no heart in the whole thing. So making education experiential is the second pillar of designing education for tomorrow. Third is interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary, or I would say maybe transdisciplinary, where it is not the discipline that decides what is the problem or what is the solution, but it is because reality is composite. It is not a problem of chemistry or biology or just environment. You know, it is a composite problem, and so the approach to it has to be also composite. So most of our courses, for instance, are interdisciplinary in their very design. For instance, we work on how flash floods can be stopped in this fragile mountain system. Now, you don't know which discipline would come in when you formulate the problem, you know, and then you try and bring in ecology, or you bring in glaciology, or whatever it takes to solve that problem. So truly transdisciplinary, you know, is the third pillar. And because, as John said, and we know, being Indian, we are one of the longest living civilization that is alive today, you know. People dated to maybe 5,000 to 8,000 years old, and it has been the most continuous civilization. So I'm sure there are knowledge systems which helped us be resilient, which helped us, overcome all the ups and downs that we went through, so that we are even today intact. You would be surprised to know that in India, there is no word for sustainability. I tried looking up in Sanskrit and in Hindi. There is no word for sustainability. Why is that? Because there was no other way to be. You know, everything we did was sustainable. It was locally sustainable. We had compost toilets that even use the humanure, you know, to fertilize the gardens. It did not have to go through those large sewerage systems, which is the the gift of industrial revolution. So I think going back to first principles, you know, is what we need. And when India became free, unfortunately, the people who were at the helm of designing the education system were these elites who were trained by the British to think like the British. And they were just maybe 5 to 10%, and who were not at all in touch with reality. Even today, 90% of India who knows their indigenous wisdom are marginalized, you know, what Thomas was saying. We do not include them in the design process. Whereas the entire indigenous wisdom, I visited Jaisalmer, where there is a gentleman who works on these khadins. So Jaisalmer is a desert where it just rains for a week in a year. And there is an old system, a traditional system of collecting that water in reservoirs, and they know where those reservoirs are, because a feet below there is a clay cover where the water stays. And then in that 1 week of rain, they are able to grow gram, which kind of sustains them for the whole year. It is 4 to 5 crore rupees. And then I asked him, is the government taking this idea forward? And they said, no, look at this, there are these canals made, you know, which is getting water from 200 kilometers from Satluj or some river. Because canal is one, you know, it is when you're not in touch with the context and you do not know what are the indigenous problems, you have this one size fits all solution. And that those canals were broken everywhere and there was no water in them, whereas nobody's even, and I was thinking this gentleman was truly a transdisciplinarian. He knew about the flora, he knew about when the animals would procreate and how it would affect. He was a walking encyclopedia. He was all of what we are talking about. He was contextual, he was working with his hands, he was experiential, he was transdisciplinary, and he had this indigenous wisdom. And I was wondering, do schools or colleges in Jaisalmer even teach this anymore? Or are we teaching something which is a copy of something that is happening, you know, somewhere in the world? So this is the fourth pillar, is this, we have to have a complete indigenization, and I'm not saying that we just go back, but we use it as a springboard to the future and blend it with all that the modern technology has to offer.
So thank you. I wonder whether even if the teachers taught it in the schools in Jaisalmer, the young students would accept it. It's also about, like you said, maybe just experiencing it and really seeing the impact of the changes that there are. Over to you, John. How do you see, what do you see as the changes, or how should we reconstruct education is?
I just want to follow up immediately what my dear friends were just saying with a story from the south of Italy, where I've worked for the last few years with some friends on how to bring back abandoned villages to life.
Wow.
And it's a very good example. We take multidisciplinary groups to work in these villages, one or two, but the local people are the kind of clients and our hosts, not some abstract institution. And in one of them called Grottoli in the south of Italy, we said, okay, what sort of neglected resources are there here? And we did a research over several weeks of asking people, you know, what used to be in that building? Well, what did this farmer used to grow? Does that old grandmother have any recipes that we should know about? And by this research process, we came to a man who was the barber, actually, who said, well, I'm a barber, but I'm also, my big passion is growing crocuses because I'm a saffron dealer. I said, really? And it turned out that this little valley near this village was perfect by happy luck for growing crocuses, and therefore he had a rather healthy saffron crop. He said, you know what, I have a problem because the rats are eating the bulbs when I plant them. I said, ha. And I realized that in Delhi, about 10 years before that exploration of this small village in the south of Italy, I'd met people on the banks of the river growing crocuses and saffron, nomadic people, very poor people, sort of low caste people with incredible expertise at growing crocuses for saffron. So I made a couple of phone calls and said, how do you stop rats eating the bulbs of crocuses? And I got back a slightly garbled, but you know, more or less usable story about different plants and different ways of repelling the rats. And in our group, they were design people, broadly interpreted, but none of us was an expert on crocuses, rats, saffron markets, or any of that. We had to discover those things. So this is a tiny example of what happens when you get out of the schoolroom, out of the design studio, and go to a place in which there's all sorts of stories there that you just have to find out about them. And it just, when you asked about would young people be interested, if you tell them back at home, we're going to go to a village and talk about saffron, they say, no, why would I be interested? Once you get them there, they just came to life. It was fantastic. So the trick is how you get people to make the step to go to the context or the situations that we've been talking about. That, I think, but then we're in a crisis. People they're looking for something different. So now is a good time to start offering them that as an opportunity.
Thomas, how do you see education changing, or do we need to change anything to make things work better in the future?
Well, first of all, I feel woefully inadequate to follow the previous stories. Those are tremendously exciting snapshots of really, really exciting context. And again, coming from when you mentioned Gitanjali about 5,000 to 8,000 years old, I live in a country that just had our 150th birthday. Now again, we have a heritage further back than that in Europe, and we had many indigenous peoples here in Canada long before we ever got here. But I have no stories to compare to yours, which are so exciting. But I'll go back for a moment to maybe 2 points. Geetha was talking about the link between education and industry. And we have a saying at Carleton. We say, you can put our students to work on Monday morning. And the intent there is that they're minimally competent to contribute tomorrow. The education has prepared them to be contributors. But we see that as the very, very first step to their career and the very basis of a pyramid of a foundation. And it's just so that they can be minimally valuable. But we also teach them that they are industry. So if we just trained students for industry the way it is, very little would change. And we have to teach our young people that they need to go to work. They need to somehow make a living and support their families, but that's just the foundation. Hopefully they, in a sense, become industry. They bring something unique to industry and they change it and evolve it. And so the more that we prepare them minimally with something like simple skills, but at the same time teach them to be open-minded, to be flexible, to be inclusive. We hopefully can find a better balance that we're not just training them for industry, but we're training them to become and to change industry. That's one point. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a second.
That's okay. You can always come back
Yeah.
to it.
Please
Okay.
go ahead. I'll come back to it.
All right, super. So we're getting a lot of questions from the audience, but there's one very important thing that we need your viewpoint on. So let's keep it short so that we can take the questions from the audience. And this really is about what everyone's talking about digital teaching and learning. So very quickly, do you think design or creative education can be taken online? Any opportunities? Also any warnings, anything that, you know, that we don't want, any practices from our past education that we don't want to take ahead and that we'd be happy to leave behind? So digital teaching and learning in design, creativity, over to you. I can see the women smiling.
I'm ready to go.
Okay, go for it.
I think we're already on that
I think we all have very strong views on this. I don't think this is a question that we will speak briefly on, but I'm quite passionate about what I want to say. I think the connecting the dots are between the offline and the online, you know, and just, I was listening to the end of Dr. Singh's talk, and he was saying that in India, he's going to regulate a greater thing from moving from 20% of content in an online form to 40%. So he's not talking about 100%. So I'm just making it clear that that's what the chairman of the UGC just said on the previous panel. But when we are talking about connecting the dots between online and offline, we're also have to realize we're connecting the dots between the real and the virtual, or the real and the artificial, or the real and the simulated. And when Geethanjali is talking about her pillar of experience, and being contextual, I'm not so sure how much of the mud architecture and all the other examples she gave comes totally out of being virtual, but it can come out of life. I'm just going to not put it away completely. I'm not discarding it.
Yeah.
So the example that I was thinking about was a very simplistic example, and people can tear it apart, but I was just thinking about the spectacles I wear, right? And my spectacles are designed, but they are enhancing my sight. They make me see better. I could have, so technology can make you see better. It can make you hear better. It can make you, if you have an artificial knee, it can make you walk better. But you have less pain. But in the end, it's all fitted onto my body.
Sure.
Whether I have a knee or whether I have my glasses or whether another person, and forgive me, I'm an older person and I'm thinking of all the things that are my part
the
of
knee, yeah.
If I'm 25 years old, I wouldn't be giving you these examples. So I ask for that, some leeway in that. But let's just take something like the spectacle which sits on your nose and lets you see better. I think that's what the online provides. It provides you to see something at a more granular scale, larger perhaps amounts of data that can be compiled so you can bring larger patterns, but it has to be fitted onto something. It can't exist on its own. Now, people could argue and then say that I'm simplifying it and saying this glasses goes on my nose and so you're fitting it on a body. I'm not saying that online education has to be fitted just onto student bodies. I'm saying that what gives us meaning and relevance, eloquently expressed by Geethanjali, eloquently added on by John and Thomas, is that we're talking about what gives us life. What is the life-giving force to create? So creativity is only an adjective in the end, right? You can call things joyful before, and now you call them creative, and somebody else will call it play. But in the end, what is the life force? What is that pedagogy that will drive humanness? But life force is not only about us. It's about the planet. It's about a system. It's about ecological thinking. And so when we are thinking about the virtual, the simulated, the artificial, and the online, as substitutes for the real experiential part of it, we must not make a mistake in making it 100%. And if we tag on to it, we have to tag on all the dimensions that Geethanjali was talking about, and she's spoken so eloquently about 4 pillars, so they make total sense. And if you are looking at this, the role of online for me is to augment, to extend, maybe to simplify, and to enable, but never to detract from the life-giving force of what we provide in real education, not in this industrial conveyor belt. I'm finishing all the units, you got all the credits, you can pass or fail there, you got a rubber stamp, you're a designer. I'm not talking about that world. And I'm very happy that world is in crisis and is coming to an end. I'm extremely happy. So what we do, if I go back to the beginning, we're searching for something timeless, we're searching for something essential, we're searching for something enduring. Skills are going to change like that copier. We don't have to worry about spending too much time teaching skills. We can add that on whenever we want. But what we need to know is how are we going to live our lives and what are we going to practice? The essential nature of practice has to drive what we do in education. And we can only do that if we take out, throw out, discard, subtract, all the stuff that we put into it to make it look whatever century we were talking about, you know, this 21st century learning skills, 21st century something else, throw it out. But the only thing that you have to retain is the pure and the pristine. And that requires everybody to search. And if we are thinking about pedagogies that sustain life, not just for us, but for the planet, and we've learned that in that pandemic, we know we're in climate change. And one of the things that upsets me is the dialogue on COVID is obliterating the dialogue on climate change, which is also something that we are forgetting about at a very important moment in time. So what does it mean for all of us? It means that we get out of the cerebral. You can't just have online in the cerebral. In some ways, the online has also got to embrace the practical. We have to engage in an imagination challenge, which designers and artists are all very well prepared to do. We can't be in an either or mindset. We have to have both, and less is always more. And when you join all the dots, Nandita, I close by repeating Swami Chinmayananda when he talked about in his book, which was about man-making, part 1. It is a Chinmayananda's translation from the Bhagavad Gita. And Geethanjali touched upon it. I will not quote it, but the dots we have to join is the head, the heart, and the mind. And the mind is consciousness. And consciousness comes from the environment and it comes from the experience. We cannot push everything into online and forget about life. It must endure, and we have to search for it. And we also have to practice letting go.
Geetha, can I give you a hug from here?
It's a difficult position to take, and I'm not a popular person, but
no.
Some of the advantages of online is we can't give each other hugs.
Yeah, that is true. But can anyone take that on? I think that philosophically we all believe that the humanness, the humanity, the experience, the being together, that connection is very important. But anything that you see, I mean, what are the benefits of online?
No, can I answer that? Can anybody take you on? You said, if we have to take you on. As a director of a college, I cannot tell my students, you stay safely in your home and I will never see you. I've already not seen them for 4 months, right? But neither do I want them to come and sit in a closed classroom, breathing COVID fumes. Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to get them anything that John talked about, right? So, the point is that maybe they can find out some things that are proximate to themselves.
Sure.
Maybe they can do research in their own areas. Maybe we can be aggregators. Maybe we can all connect together, which I know, Nandita, is something that you're talking about, is how do we all work in collaboration with Thomas, all of you are talking about it at the WDO. But I don't think we should just give up and say that. We have to find a way forward. We don't know the answers, but we must know we can't do some things.
Super.
I think John
But I think, yeah, I'm going to hand over to John, but I think that in spirit, we all agree with you, but we must remember that those glasses and also that this online is what's allowing us all to actually be together. Like I said in the beginning, I would never have been able to have this panel. I've met each of you separately, maybe you, Geetha, you and Thomas together, but John maybe 4 or 5 years ago, Gitanjali, I think 3 years ago, but really to bring this group together, plus the close to 400 people who are listening to us. So John, anything, where do you think we can use digital for teaching and learning?
We use digital, there's nothing I can add to Geetha except for one sentence, which is with digital, its main function is to collect us to life. And so I'll give you one example. I'm at this moment teaching a summer school for 25 people, mainly in Europe, about Back to the Land. That's the title of the school. And every time we meet on a Zoom group, one of the first practices we do is to say, what is the place outside your room, outside your house, outside your space where you will go and connect with nature?
Yeah.
That is a formal part of the course. And they are instructed by a wonderful artist called Annika from Sweden about how to connect with a place for 30 minutes every day. And for all of these 24 senior students, it's the first time in their life they've been asking to do that. So I'll stop there. Digital connects us to life.
Okay, super. So you use the digital interface to tell people in another country or to guide them as where to go, what to do, and how to understand their lives better. Okay.
It's a practice.
What I would like to add here is, let's say the same flu happened 100 years ago, which we know of. And if we were to ask the survivors how it was, I think it was, we are much more privileged because of this connectivity, you know. So this online thing does bring a certain element of, lack of despondency in such times. And also this time has given us the opportunity to look into what we had taken for granted, you know, the way we were just carrying on business as usual. And I'm sure in India, we consider nature as Mother Nature. And since it is a mechanism that self-corrects, this must have been for humanity, you know, something consciously designed by nature to just stop and take a relook at where we were headed. And now that we have got these 3 months, again, we should not go back to the cause of this very thing, which is the reductionist thinking, you know. The whole problem of today is this or that, you know, it is like one thing, in opposition to another. We have to move from the or mentality to the and mentality, you know. So yes, digital, it's like saying 150 years ago, do you think buildings are the mantra for education, you know? Or when we move from forest education to this whole industrialized way. So it is not building that was the mantra. Similarly, it is not digital, which is the mantra. But as Geetha said, what is the software that is being, delivered through that? What is the pedagogy? What is the human interaction? Like I take a lot of courses online, but when the same teacher I meet personally, I mean, what gets transferred or transmitted, that passion of the teacher, and that is the first thing, that online cannot do away with human interaction. And secondly, the whole experiential learning that we're talking of, practice-based, it needs, it is not just knowledge-based. But what we have been able to do at Hayal is use this time to blend both. For instance, we had a responsible tourism course for this period, and then this whole thing happened. So we had this question, should we cancel it? But we went ahead with it. And we have 30% content, which is delivered online. And 70% is what the practice the students have to do. For instance, if they have to set up a homestay, they identify a room in their house, they are taught hospitality, they set it up. And similarly, we are doing now post-production, post-harvest, a course in post-harvest. So there also we'll have an online component of how, let's say, you can make a particular, essence or a particular jam, and then there'll be a component of practice with it. So in today's times, as I said, the zeitgeist needs to be respected. So the spirit of the times is technology and digital, but we, like money or other things, they say, you know, make them tools. Do not be enslaved by them. So this technology is something we have to master, and we have to use it and not be used by it.
Thank you. Geetha, Thomas, I'm going to give you a question. I've just been going through, there are so many questions, we don't have time. A lot of them have been actually answered in this, and there's a lot of praise for each one of you and what you've been saying. But Thomas, as part of the WDO, and we try to engage industry with education, the question is, what should be the role of industry in design education in the context of experiential learning? So can the industry help in this experiential learning for design and other professions?
My answer to that is very simple. There are times when it's extremely valuable to have industry partners in the classroom, and there are times when you don't want them anywhere near the students. It's that straightforward. As I said before, in terms of training them, teaching them practices that they'll need to perform when they get to become professionals, that's where we can work with industry. But coming back to the education thing, I did recall what I was going to say at the last one, but your question was, can design education be taken online? Well, the answer is yes, because we've done it. But maybe the question is, to what degree have we been successful? When I think about the opportunities, I think about a huge opportunity for a balance between asynchronous and synchronous learning. So when you're in the classroom, clearly the classroom model is dedicated towards a certain kind of learning. So now we have students who maybe learn differently, learn more slowly, more quickly, in different ways, more quietly. So the ability now to have both synchronous and asynchronous education, to be able to provide material to them in advance, for example, that we can discuss when we come together, provides huge opportunities for us to tailor education to more individual types of learning.
Super. Thank you, Thomas. We can see that the next set of people have come in. So I'm going to close now, and I'm going to do something which is not contextual to me, but proximate. As Geetha said, I'm going to end by quoting a verse from a poem, a Punjabi poem, and I'm from Kerala, so it doesn't, I mean, so that's where the proximation happens, because it, when I talk to you all, it touched me internally. The name of the poem is Sab To Khatarnak, and it's a poem by Pash, who's a revolutionary Punjabi poet. I'm just going to do one verse. It's in Punjabi, but I will translate. Sab To Khatarnak means the most dangerous. It says, सबसे खतरनाक होता है मुर्दा शांति से भर जाना, तड़प का न होना, सब कुछ सहन कर जाना, घर से निकलना काम पर और काम से लौटकर घर आना, सबसे खतरनाक होता है हमारा सपनों का मर जाना. This means, for those of you who are not very Punjabi fluent, that the biggest danger is in getting trapped in the routine of running from home to work, work to home. The most dangerous accident is the death of our dreams. And the most dangerous is that I, which witnesses it all but remains frozen. That I that forgets to kiss the world with a passion. And I think that this really represents all of you here. The passion that you bring into education, the passion that design brings into education in the future. And I'm super happy, and I hope that, I'm sure that this will take us far ahead. Pramath, over to you.
Thank you
I know
so
when
much.
you arrive that the signals are on. Okay.
But listen, thank you so much. This was a fantastic panel. I had to step out, but I came back in. And I really want to thank all of you for joining us, and especially from all over the world. And Tom, all the way from Canada and across the world. So this has been our most international panel. I want to again thank each one of you for making the time, and Nandita for putting together such a wonderful panel. I think you've been great. So thank you so much. Please stay. We have a keynote address coming up by Dr. Rick Levin. Rick is the former CEO of Coursera, as well as the former president of Yale University. He's talking about the future of online education. And is going to be moderated by my good friend Ashish Dhawan, who is the founder and chairman of the board of trustees of Ashoka University. They are both here, so I will ask Ashish to please come online and then introduce Rick. Ashish, I know you were here and I had shut your video off. I hope you are able to turn it back on.
Yeah, I'm just trying. Yeah, there we are.
You have to, you are oriented 90 degrees wrong. Thank you, Ashish.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, great. Thank you, Pramath. Yeah, it's my pleasure to welcome
Ashish, your voice is
President Levin. I've had the honor of... Can you hear me now, Pramath?
Yeah, your voice was going in and off, so please go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, I was saying it's my honor to welcome President Levin, and it's great to have him here as part of this conference. I graduated from Yale in 1992, and Rick became president in 1993 and served as the president of Yale for 2 decades, for 20 years, and led a number of initiatives at Yale, including the internationalization of Yale, spurring it. And then later, in a rather unusual move, became the CEO of Coursera, which was a fledgling startup at the time. And from 2014 to 2017, was the CEO before he stepped down and then handed over the baton after establishing Coursera as a leading online learning platform. So Rick, it's a pleasure to have you here and look forward to your insights on building the university of the future.
Thank you very much, Ashish. And thank you very much for inviting me to this gathering of so many leaders of Indian higher education. It's a great honor and pleasure to be working with you. Let me give me 1 minute while I share my screen and get my slides up. Oh, there we go.
Rick, are you able to do that? Maybe we need to turn your...
I think I can do it. I think
oh, yes.
got it. Okay. And let me just go to present mode. Okay, how's that? It's up for everyone?
Perfect, perfect.
Yeah, it's working.
Okay. Great, thank you. Skip one. So what I'm going to talk about today is three topics, ask 3 questions. First is, what have we learned from the history of online education, with a particular interest in what have we learned from the history of online education that applies to this moment. So that's the second question. How should we apply these lessons to our response to the current COVID-19 crisis? And then finally, looking further forward, what is the role of online learning in the future of higher education, and how will that change the nature of what we as university leaders do in the long run? The more modern history of online education, I think, began in the mid-1990s, just after the internet got started, with the idea of taking degree programs online. So it's very natural that the first thing that happens when a new medium comes along is that you simply replicate the old medium, what happens in the old medium on the new medium. And that's sort of what happened in the 90s. You had content offered that was a mix of text and video. Later, live sessions were included when streaming capabilities became better on the internet. Initially, though, in the United States, and I think there was a similar situation in India, initially, the people that offered online degrees and scaled those programs were not very reputable. For-profit companies in the US were tarnished by very low completion rates and very high default rates on student loans. And that led to some legislation to control their activity and sort of started off on the wrong foot, really, for online education. But in the last decade, there's been a rapid growth of more reputable programs offered by established universities, often leading universities, that has found a really substantial market. By 2017, 30% of all master's students in the United States and 13% of undergraduates were enrolled in fully online degree programs. Oops. But the real action, I think, in online education came not through degree programs at first, but eventually through standalone courses. This started around the turn of the millennium. Cornell, Columbia, Yale, Oxford, Stanford, so top tier schools started to put material online. Very high quality production, although hampered by the latency on the internet still in that period of time. These were not successful. The people had not found the formula that worked. These were sort of high quality. They weren't very interactive. They were more like watching television than they were like taking a course. Then the next phase in the middle 2000s was open educational resources, where MIT, Yale, UC Berkeley, and a few other schools simply posted on the internet all of the material pertaining to their courses, to many of their courses, which was a reading list, the syllabi, the assignments, the exercises, problem sets, and so forth, as well as, in some cases, the videos of the lectures. The IITs did a similar exercise in the same time period, putting a number of courses online through NPTEL here in India. And this had, the asynchronous content gave learners flexibility to look at it whenever they wanted, but most of it was unproduced. It was simply classroom capture of lectures. The NPTEL lectures, very much like the MIT and Yale lectures, just went into the classroom and took recorded what happened in that classroom. It wasn't very compelling for an internet audience. It tended to be pretty unengaging. The revolution came in 2012. I'm a little partial, having spent time at Coursera, but the MOOC really seemed to change the game when all of a sudden 3 companies emerged, two of them from Stanford, Udacity and Coursera, one from MIT and Harvard, edX, and put courses online in the fall of 2011 and spring of 2012 that attracted 100,000 students or more. And that got a lot of attention in the media. It was overhyped, and it took a while to live up to the reputation, but I believe it's turned the corner these days. Now, what is a MOOC exactly, and why is it different from the past? Well, first of all, it has the capacity to handle massive scale. Second, it is asynchronous, but it's not passive. The best of MOOCs are very active. The lectures are broken into small segments, after each segment there's an activity for the learner. And so learning is optimized by that kind of routine of watching 6 or 7 minutes of lecture and then doing something, answering a quiz or doing a small project. And it does engage learners much more. Retention is much, much better than having an hour-long lecture uninterrupted online. These courses can be stacked into larger units, such as specializations or nano degrees, and even build up in 2-degree programs. The courses are typically offered through content aggregators who draw their courses from universities and from industry professionals. The leading platforms are Coursera, edX, Udacity, FutureLearn, and Swayam here in India. And the big takeaway, I think, is that the unprecedented scale allows for the analysis of data on learners. You have the clickstream data on every learner, and you could see every single step a learner takes in the process of learning. And this allows for rapid iteration and rapid improvement in the quality of courses and for testing of new pedagogical tools. So that's the first lesson from the past. One is that scale drives learning about online pedagogy, and we have accumulated quite a bit of learning. We are able to look at individual segments of courses, look at the results in the quizzes in those segments, which are interspersed throughout the courses. And we can find if there's a segment where students show low mastery or a segment where students drop out after watching that segment, you can revise the segment. You have a new sample population the next day, and you can begin to accumulate data on how the intervention worked. This is unprecedented in the history of educational research because typically you'd experiment with a class and then you'd have to wait till the next time you offered the class a year later to try something different. You can try things different at a weekly or monthly interval on platforms like Coursera or edX and compare the results and improve your course. We determined through experimentation and iteration the optimal length of lecture segments, optimal course duration, and the optimal frequency of course offerings. We've learned how to validate assessments with much more rapid cycles than you could possibly do teaching live to smaller classes. We've developed learning tools such as self-guided and collaborative projects and peer grading that we can test and then improve again through rapid iteration. And we've learned also that despite the advantages of this asynchronous online learning and its scale, that there's no substitute for some live interaction. That is, the best learning results are achieved not by live teaching alone, not by online teaching alone, but by the combination. And MIT studies have verified this several times, that in-person activity, whether it's online or live, and it can be online, it can be synchronous online, where students get some opportunity for discussion and for questions being answered and for individual attention, certainly helps with learning. It's something we, as educators, all know intuitively, but it's been verified. But the interesting fact is the least effective way of teaching is to give an uninterrupted lecture for an hour. It's the worst means of transmitting knowledge. Some other lessons, and these were surprises for the most part. When the MOOCs came out, everyone thought they were going to take over higher education, that they would be used by other universities. You know, Harvard courses or MIT courses would be adopted all around the world, and it would drive universities to lower employment levels, lower cost, but destroy their character. That was the worry. But the primary audience for MOOCs initially turned out not to be students at all, students in college age. In fact, at Coursera, only 13% of the learners until recently were under age 22. They were mainly learners between age 22 and 40 who were seeking credentials to advance their careers in business, in computer science, in computing jobs, in data science. And these micro-credentials have become a labor market currency, at least in the US, but I suspect considerably in India as well, as students post their credentials on job sites like LinkedIn, and companies have begun to hire to them, especially in the tech sector. Another surprise was that companies and governments have become a significant channel for distribution. As we learned that learning for career advantage was what learners wanted, companies became a target, and companies willingly and enthusiastically adopted online platforms as part of their internal learning programs. And so today, for example, Coursera has over 3,000 company clients that use its courses. Final learning was, and I heard an echo of this at the very end of the last session, is that it's not only professors who can effectively teach, that when you get to practical skills and applications of theoretical knowledge in practice, that company and industry experts can do an excellent job. So we see many MOOCs, and in fact, at Udacity, virtually all the instruction is done by company and industry experts, while the balance at edX and Coursera is still toward the academic. Now, as we move toward the current time, on the eve of COVID, I think we began to see a second MOOC revolution. So not just the MOOC itself, but the use of MOOCs inside universities, as I mentioned, where they can potentially reduce the cost and increase the quality of education by sharing courses across universities. This has been resisted pretty fiercely until the COVID crisis hit, as nearly all universities have, as I suggested, resisted wanting to use other people's content. But we have demonstrated, and both Coursera and edX have demonstrated through experimentation, that this model really can work and work very effectively. Prime example in Coursera's case is Manipal Academy in India, which has had 3 years of experience now giving students and faculty access to online courses created elsewhere. We've had quite a bit of enrollment. Over 70,000 courses have been taken from leading universities and companies. And the skew tends to be toward subjects that are outside the study area of the formal curriculum, and where students can get career skills that are useful to them in business or in tech. And students have reported positive career impacts in seeking internships and jobs. There really are 3 use cases for course sharing. One is use the courses created elsewhere that are just use them standalone and give them credit in your program. The second is to take courses created elsewhere where incorporated and then incorporate them into blended learning strategies where local faculty use the material in their own courses as a kind of video textbook, if you will. And then the third strategy is to use courses created elsewhere without credit for students to work outside their disciplines or to learn valuable career skills. That's been the dominant case at Manipal, the third case, but actually Manipal has used all 3 as an example. And like I say, they've been up and at it for 3 years. Let me turn now to COVID-19 and note that there have been really 3 major impacts from this pandemic on online learning. The first is with both students and workers confined to home in many countries, existing online platforms have seen a gigantic surge in enrollments. I'll point that out in a minute. Most universities in the US have responded to the shutdown by simply moving existing courses online, because it typically has interrupted the academic year, and people took their courses online using video conference platforms like Zoom. And a third impact was that is that now not a handful, but thousands of universities are experimenting with course sharing as part of their response. I'm going to take up each of those in turn. Existing platforms have seen dramatic growth. I obviously have access to Coursera's data, which I don't to other companies, but worldwide, in the month of April, Coursera enrollments were up 644%. That's, sevenfold. In India, enrollments were up 15x, 1400%. And enrollments from learners new to Coursera, that's shown in the chart, in the graph on this page, enrollments from learners new to the platform were up 15x. This is explosive, to say the least. As for what was happening in universities, they moved classes online, typically via Zoom or video or similar platforms, and thus greatly multiplying the number of professors who now have experience with online teaching. That's kind of a mixed blessing, because some have had a good experience and some have had a bad experience. And for those of us who are believers in the potential of online education, it's not clear what the signal is here, but it was a start, and it certainly exposed many more professors to teaching online. The initial results, and I really only have a US sample for this, but the initial results have been mixed. And I would argue they've been mixed because most professors simply replicated what they do in the classroom. They didn't really have time, as the third bullet says, they didn't have time to incorporate the lessons of past experience that I've been talking about. So what happened was people just, if they had a seminar course, they took it online and had a conference discussion over Zoom. If it was a lecture course, they gave their lectures over Zoom. Now, actually, it's not surprising there was a different result, because in seminar courses, if you've got 15 students and they're all right in front of you on a Zoom screen, it's really not very much different from a live classroom. And in fact, that's the results, at least from the sample of schools we've talked to in the US, that for the most part, instructors in seminar settings were quite pleased with the transition and felt there was no diminution in the quality of the experience. On the other hand, professors giving lecture courses struggled a great deal more, because just sitting and watching a lecture, which may seem captivating in a classroom, and the magic and the aura of the professor's knowledge can sometimes be spellbinding, it didn't work so well online, particularly for professors who were reading from notes. Doesn't look great on the screen. So we've had a mixed bag. In the third area, course sharing accelerated. This too has had a remarkable trajectory. Coursera for Campus, which is a product offering that we introduced last fall, was offered free to all educational institutions in March until July 31st. And around the world, 5,500 campuses have activated programs, 1,200 of those universities in India. 1.2 million unique learners have enrolled, 700,000 of whom are in India, and 5.7 million, there have been 5.7 million enrollments in courses, a little more than half of them in India. The uptake here has been remarkable, as you can see, and that's a significant fraction of the of the university population in your country. So we're very delighted. It's interesting that the uptake of the course sharing has been most prominent, not just in South Asia, but all through a crescent extending from South Asia through to North Africa. So the Middle East, Central Asia, Kazakhstan, Ukraine, Turkey, Egypt, these countries are the leading countries in terms of adoption. Now, what can we do now? So the question is, how can we apply the lessons? Many of us can expect to be online for at least part of the coming academic year. The disease is not yet under control in India, and there's now a tremendous resurgence in the United States, as I'm sure you've read about. So it's very likely that a lot of schools will be at least partially online, if not entirely online, in the fall. What can we do to improve the quality of teaching by applying the lessons from the past? I would argue that between now and reopening, universities should consider replacing live lectures with high quality recorded videos. They should insert frequent breaks in those lecture videos to test mastery using the learning that we've had from the online platforms. They should try to incorporate individual or collaborative projects. This can be done on Zoom through the breakout function in Zoom. You know, teams working together on things independently of the lecturer's involvement. But even better, institutions should consider using tool-rich platforms such as Coursera, edX, or FutureLearn, or Shyam, where many of these features are built in, and it's very easy to take the best learning practices and employ them. And this, of course, for the 1,200 universities in India that have signed on to Coursera for Campus, you already have access to those tools. Part of the deal is you not only get to get the courses from other universities, but you can also create courses on your own using the platform. And then another thing you can do is increase the use of courses that are really well produced and that can be used to supplement what you do online. So if you're giving a lecture course and you have to go online, maybe you want to use that Yale course instead, And as the lectures, and you get online and break your students out into smaller discussion groups and talk with them about what they're learning, possibility. Anyway, those are suggestions for the near term. What will happen afterward? What's the future look like? Well, I think online education is, with this impetus, this tremendous surge, it may not be totally sustained, but online education will continue to grow. I think more faculty will adopt best practices and increase the use of blended learning and on-campus teaching. I think you'll see universities around the world offering more courses to external and non-residential learners, recognizing that there's audiences outside the confines of the campus that are eager to learn. So I think universities will be seeking new audiences in the workplaces and among lifelong learners. And I think the course sharing will radically lower the cost of education and become much more widely adopted. So let me turn finally to the question of what does the university of the future look like? And just to illustrate some of the themes we've discussed. Prior to a decade ago, virtually all universities concentrated on one thing, and that was the undergraduate and graduate degree programs they held on their campuses. In the future, and already today, but even more so in the future, you're going to see universities offering degree programs, those same degree programs, fully online. You're going to see them offering micro-credentials for an audience that is entirely different, mid-career learners who want to gain practical knowledge and advance their careers. I think you'll see universities offering learning programs directly to enterprises and to governments for their workforce development, and for education and for remedial education, for example, for college prep and things of that sort, to governments. And finally, I think you'll see universities both creating courses for others and importing courses from other universities. An entirely new ecosystem where the audience of universities is greatly expanded, where the mission of the university expands from the narrow confines of its campus to embrace the whole world, and where we can look toward a future for educators that I think is tremendously exciting, that offers us the potential to just play a much more important role in society by being responsible for the education of the citizenry throughout their lifetimes. So with that, I thank you and happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Rick. Thanks for sharing your thoughts. I wanted to get started, Rick, by asking you about, the fact that a lot of people talk about disruption because it's a term that's borrowed from the corporate sector, and we've seen disruption in many other industries. But universities have been much more resilient. At least history has shown us, and they've survived much longer. And there's a longer lead time in terms of innovation. Do you believe this time it's truly different? And do you believe there's a category of universities that really will go bust? And do the tier 1 universities just become larger in terms of impact? I mean, that's the current belief, and that's what most of us see. But just wanted to get your thoughts on that. And then specifically in terms of, programs, if you look at the terminal master's degree, is that the first one that really starts to, I mean, you mentioned the statistics in terms of online degrees, and obviously masters are higher than bachelors, and at least at a top tier university, I can't imagine anything other than the physical experience, of course, with online integrated into campus. But in terms of even at top universities like Harvard and Yale and Stanford, will we see terminal master's degrees morph into blended or fully online programs?
Yeah. To take the second question first, it's the easiest one. Yes, I think we're already seeing that. The fact that 30% of U.S. master's students are online is pretty amazing already. And what has happened in the last few years is the top tier institutions have finally started to offer these. I mean, there are the disruptors who've been offering programs for a long time, Arizona State, Southern New Hampshire, that have dozens of online programs. But now, now you have schools like University of Michigan, University of Pennsylvania, Imperial College London, all offering, really high quality first tier master's programs, University of Illinois, first tier master's programs online to much larger cohorts than they would accommodate on campus. My favorite story is the business school at the University of Illinois, which was Coursera's first online degree program. The business school at Illinois had a large undergraduate population, and an MBA program of about 150 students per year. They offered their MBA online and are now up to a situation where they have 12 to 1,500 students per year online. And the program is so successful, it draws students of a higher quality than can be attracted to rural Illinois, where the university sits. And after several years of experience, last year, the University of Illinois decided to shut down its residential MBA program and concentrate exclusively on residential undergraduate teaching and an online master's. So yes, I think you're going to see all institutions and elite institutions playing a big role in terminal master's education. And what you're going to see is a big growth in terminal master's education, because what we've learned from that experience is so far is that the student body is about 10 years older on average than the student body for live on campus programs. So what you're doing is you're opening the door to people in their 30s instead of their 20s who are already in careers who want to pick up that degree, and they can do it much more easily. They don't want to move somewhere. They're in a job. They want to do this part-time, and they can do it that way without disruption to their lives. So yes, online masters. And I agree with you about bachelor's degrees. The reason why masters are easier to go online is that the residential experience and the character development and the whole, after all, the years of undergraduate education are not just years of learning about academic content. They're also years of personal development and maturation, and socialization, and that's done, best in a residential setting. So I think there will be more online bachelors, but it won't grow as fast as masters. As for disruption, this is not a winner-take-all market. It just never will be, because there's too many diverse needs in the field of education. The populations that we educate are so different. The capability of students, the distribution of capabilities is so different that there will always be a tiering between the schools that attract the best and those who attract others. I just think there's going to be, it's not likely that there'll be a dominant, player in the education space. That's not going to happen. But there will be the growth of some very large institutions, and Arizona State's already on that path. I mean, they have 100,000 residential students, and their aspiration is to have 1 million online students, and that very well could happen in the next decade. So there will be some very innovative institutions out there that do develop very large programs, but the market is so vast. So many millions of students are engaged in full-time study that it will never be dominated by a single player.
Rick, there's a couple of questions around the fact that, we've seen, as you mentioned, initially the success of Coursera and other platforms in more skill-based courses. And it's been folks who've already graduated from college using these certifications in the marketplace. There's two questions. One is around in the more creative disciplines or in the humanities, where it's more of a Socratic method. Does online work, pure online education work as well? And then secondly, there's a question around when will online education be treated on par with the physical education in terms of the value of a degree?
Okay, so the first question, I think the humanities, does it work online? I think actually the recent experience has proven that case. That is, as I just mentioned, the online interaction on the Zoom platform, like we're having now. But imagine that we had 12 people or 15 in a discussion seminar. There's a high degree of interaction. The professor can actually see everyone's face in one glimpse, as opposed to having to look around the seminar room. It works fine, and it's the humanities, at Yale at least, it's the humanities professors who teach small classes who have had the best experience with the transition to online. So the learning can work, but what you're missing, of course, is it's not scalable. That is, it works in 15-person classes. Can that same spirit of excitement and a group inquiry and a critical thinking and Socratic teaching, can that be done with 1,000 students in the same class as you can, something you can do with a computer science course? I think not easily. So I think there'll always be a differential, or at least it's likely to be a substantial differential in the effectiveness of online methods, depending on the content. And then courses like, creative courses that involve studio projects. It's interesting, we've had good experience at Coursera with some of these, but again, they're not, they're better if there's more individual attention. So that is to say, Berklee College of Music in the United States teaches songwriting courses. And the project in the courses, you write songs and perform them. Now, in a scalable online version, you do that with peers, and you don't get the professor's criticism and feedback of your work. So that's a diminution, no question. It's not the same as you would get in a live class. And I mean, so you can do projects online. You could do visual art. You can do music. You can do design projects, but something's lost in those compared to the live experience.
There's another question, Rick, around price differential and where does that settle and what does that mean for price pressure on more traditional programs?
Well, it depends where you sit, but surprisingly, having come from an institution you might think would be defensive, when I got to Coursera, I decided I wanted to be a disruptor, and so we've offered our master's degree programs. They're all in the range of $20,000 to $30,000 US for the entire program, whether it's a year or 2-year program, and that, of course, is well below the tuition levels of US universities and well below the tuition levels that UK universities charge to international students. I think there will be price pressure, but to the extent the universities adopt course sharing, there will be cost reduction. So that if we really have a very effective regime of using other content and effective, in a sense, scaling the effectiveness of professors, both at the producing institution and at the consuming institution, the economics, I think, can work out well on both sides.
Ashish, sorry to butt in. And
yeah, just one last question, Pramath, if that's okay. I think there's a question around how you discover, I mean, if there are all these different platforms, how does one discover courses and even compare across platforms? And then if there's such a proliferation of certificates that are being handed out, does the certificate essentially lose its value over time?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think I don't think it's, I think, first of all, how do you assess the quality of the content? There's not yet well-developed kind of rating services, although there is something called Class Central that does do, you know, top 10 lists, top 50 lists of courses in different fields, looking at across the platforms. I would think that as the field grows, there, you know, like in every other consumer goods industry, there'll be some independent sources that, you know, people that develop businesses based on rating the content, you know. So I would welcome that. Would love to see that. I mean, in Coursera, we do post the ratings of, you know, every individual completes a course, rates it, and we post those with the course information. But you know, that's just the beginning. There should be more. As for losing value, yes, I think proliferation of credentials is a problem, I think, potentially. But, you know, again, here, there will be some winners. There will be credentials that become well-known and succeed. I mean, there are millions of professional credentials out there already. Before the online advent, you know, there are thousands of different professional certificates people can get. And, you know, there's often competition, which is going to be the standard in a particular industry for the, you know, for accounting or for welding. You know, what's going to be the standard? And I think you'll see some of that emerging. I mean, already I can see Google is working with Coursera on certification for IT support specialists, and that's had an enormous audience. And I would not be surprised to see that become an industry standard within a couple of years. So there'll be some of that.
Thanks, Rick, for sharing your insights. I'm sorry we've run out of time, but really appreciate you participating in this conference. Over to you, Pramod.
Thanks a lot, Rick. Great to see you again. Sorry we had to cut you off. And Ashish, thanks for moderating this. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you, Pramod.
Thank you, Rick. I'm very happy to introduce our next panel. Sorry to keep you waiting. Professor Raj Kumar, Professor Virendra Chauhan, and Dr. Ashwin Fernandez, who are going to talk about regulations, accreditation, and rankings, and how they're going to keep up in this world where we are transitioning to digital. On track 2, we are starting an all-women panel today with Dr. Vijaya Lakshmi Nanda leading that. The link for that is in the chat box. If you click there, you'll go straight there. And we are starting on track 3, the re-engineering of engineering colleges. Again, the link is in the chat box. You can click there and you all have the password for that track. So please go ahead and join. If I can ask Professor Raj Kumar from the OP Jindal Global University to please join us, Dr. Virendra Chauhan, the chairman of NAC, and Dr. Ashwin Fernandez, who's the regional director of QS, the ranking systems, to please join us. Professor Raj Kumar is the founding vice chancellor of OP Jindal Global University, which has recently won many, many accolades, and Raj has done an amazing job of building it from scratch. Director of the International Institute of Higher Education, and many important roles, including an LLM from Harvard Law, as well as a Rhodes Scholar. Professor Virendra Chauhan is very well known as the chairman of the Executive Council of the National Assessment and Accreditation Council, NAC. He was the former director of the International Center for Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology, the Delhi component, recipient of the Padma Shri, and a PhD from Oxford University, and also joined by Dr. Ashwin Fernandez, who's the regional director for QS and CEO of QSI Gauge, worked with QS for a long time and has a PhD from Amity. Raj, please take it away. And I'm sorry you're starting a little late, but you will get your full half an hour. Don't worry. Our next keynote is at 7 o'clock, so we'll be okay.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, Pramod. And of course, it was wonderful to hear Dr. Rick Levin as well as others for this during this Republic of Lectures conference. We have with us Dr. Virendra Chauhan and Dr. Ashwin Fernandez. And without further ado, I want to first of all thank Ashoka University as well as Harappa Education for this very important initiative, sort of a celebration of universities and higher education, but most importantly, to have a series of thought-provoking panels and discussions surrounding many issues of higher education. Both Ashwin and Dr. Chauhan have been introduced, so I'm not going to take more time on that. Let me shoot off the whole context. Well, we are going to discuss about the entire regulatory aspect of higher education, but also to what extent rankings and benchmarking and accreditation are influencing and impacting the regulations. But most importantly, to be discussed this in the context of digitization and online education. Let me begin with Dr. Chauhan. Dr. Chauhan, today, as we are facing the COVID-19 crisis, many reforms and initiatives are very quickly promoted, but also at times even thrown at higher education institutions. Very quickly, the early resistance towards online education and digitization is suddenly, absorbed and even embraced in an incredible way. Now, my question to you is that, is this a question of knee-jerk and possibly a quick reaction to a crisis, or it was something that was long expected and just that it was also long overdue?
So, Raj, I'll take this question directly and very specifically. You may or may not know, a lot of people may not know this, but when I was heading UGC, we were looking at a whole lot of issues that have suddenly become very common to everyone to discuss. So, you remember the ODL businesses. So we had ODL mode running in India forever, as long as I can remember. When I was a graduate student at Delhi University, you had this open distance learning at that time. Distance learning in a different mode. Of course, then technologies came in and it started taking another shape. But we were talking about online education in India extremely seriously, much before COVID showed up. So this needs to be really clarified. Now the whole speed has gone in, so I don't think there was a great resistance in this case, considering that our GERs were in mid-20s. I think everybody was aware if you need to increase it, technology has to come in. But now you can say that there's right on in your face right now that you have to take some very quick steps. So I would disagree there's a resistance. I think there's a need. The resistance would have come from someone like me, actually, to be honest, because I have always maintained education in some, but that's not the time to discuss. But yeah, it's a reality. But the situation which was being discussed in the previous meeting, I heard the last of it, what is happening in US and UK may not be entirely relevant what is happening in India. And I'll very quickly say why it is so. NAC itself started functioning from 2001. Its first case was in 2001. We still haven't done more than 20% of our institutions under NAC. So last 2 years, you've heard lots of reforms in NAC. It's gone digital already before COVID came, 80%. Same for ranking, NIRF, everything is done digitally. So this is nothing new, but we are very much in the beginning stages of all this. So if you see what I'm trying to say, this is not new, it's just speed is now fast forward mode and we've got to deal with it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chauhan. Let me move to Dr. Ashwin Fernandez. Dr. Fernandez, one of the remarkable things about ranking organizations historically is that they look at the whole process of learning, research, and if you look at any rankings, including the QS rankings, if the large, big, old universities have grown up through brick and mortar imaginations. Now suddenly, the entire framework of rankings are also being challenged from the standpoint of the new age educational paradigm. Coursera and other platforms, including in India, Upgrad, all these organizations are challenging the historically evolved brick and mortar framework of higher education. Do you think rankings organizations are going to see a change in their methodology, in their approach, in their assessment of universities?
Thank you so much, Professor Rajkumar, for that question, and it's a pleasure to be here. Well, I think it's too early for us to be able to answer that because this is a passing phase, and while they are unprecedented times, I think rankings covers historical data. So as what is happening right now, we can see the mobility of students has stopped. Collaboration, though, cross-border has intensified, and we can. A great example is this conference where we have experts coming in from several parts of the world, are talking different elements, and are going to collaborate further after this. I suppose that the people joining in as audience as well are part of this. So I believe we will probably get back to the new normal soon. And I think while brick and mortar was the past, it will continue to be in the future, because the extensive amount of talking and surveys and conversations we've had with students is that what makes a university life is a holistic university experience, coming into a classroom, speaking to the professor, speaking to your colleagues, and having that all-rounded approach. So I think it's too early to say there are changes which can be made to rankings, but I believe we should evolve, and I think the term of internationalization perhaps would change in the future. US particularly has been innovative. What we have done is to see how institutions should evolve and adapt online learning methodology and techniques. We have actually launched our ratings called the QS iGauge eLead, e-learning academic digitization certification. So that is basically to enable institutions to be ready for the e-learning revolution. And I think eventually, if things change, we will definitely look at the ranking methodology, but it's too early, Professor Raj.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fernandez. Dr. Chauhan, let me ask you a question, because you have straddled across the world of major Indian regulatory organizations and now continue to be involved in one. Historically, the regulatory framework of higher education has been largely designed to measure higher education from the standpoint of physical campus environment, not just the physicality when it comes to buildings, but also even pedagogy, approach, faculty-student ratio. The whole framework was based upon physical experiences. Now, as we move towards embracing online education, and government is talking about 230 Indian universities, to be empowered to offer online degrees, do you think we need to fundamentally reimagine the regulatory framework? Almost everything that we have so far designed, formulated in terms of law and regulation need to be re-examined so that they become adaptable to the online education of the future?
Raj, a brief answer, a direct answer to your question is a robust yes. What form might that take? I think I agree with Fernandez that we really are in the middle of it. We just kicking it starts. So let's say tomorrow 100 university actually give an online course. Let's say all Central University and top 100 University of NIRA for QS starts giving. How would you evaluate a law course, for example, given by National Law School Bangalore versus Jodhpur? I'm just taking law because I think law and management are the two courses you're going to see real havoc, because these are the two courses or three such courses you can give. So to say that we need to immediately look at this, absolutely yes. And I just may inform all the listener or the people who joined. So ODL had no regulations. ODL, NAC did not know what to do with ODL. So this problem was brought to us. We have now in place the NAC framework, how to look at ODL, how to evaluate ODL. Personally, I think as we go forward, it's a lot of digitalization is going to be a dodgy issue, comparing A with B. And I would, if I were to look at NAC, I would simply say you're good enough to do the business versus not good enough to do business. I would hate to rank on online courses between 10 universities. It will be difficult. It's pretty doable, but let's see how it pans out. Let's see how many of the 230 actually end up giving education. So it's too early to really call on this.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chauhan. Ashwin, let me take that question to you as well. I can understand and appreciate Dr. Chauhan's response. But one of the things that, say, rankings organizations have always looked up when they looked at programs, and QS was started because of the fact that you are going to be useful to students. So you might, to what extent the parameters of assessing a regular, let's say, an MBA program or an international affairs school or a public policy school or a liberal arts school, to what extent those factors, those methodological parameters will remain useful when it comes to looking at virtual and digital programs?
So at the moment, when we look at our subject rankings, we are looking at the output of research. We're looking at the output and impact of research as well, along with academic and employer reputation. Now, and this is over a historic period of the last 5 years. And for the last ranking, which was released in June 2020, which was a 2021 edition, we looked at the 2014 to 2019 period for research. And moving on, when we launched the subject rankings later in February next year, the same period will apply. Now, while we're looking at the output of institutions at this time, when while the pandemic has hit us, the impact of this will at least take another 2 years to be assessed, which will give enough time for ranking agencies to see whether we should be looking at parameters which would cover the subjects in a new dimension. In India, what we are doing in the next month or so, we are looking at subject-specific ratings which are e-learning ready, and how do we assess those programs, those subjects. We are launching 11 subject ratings in the next 12 months to be evaluated as a ranking system, as a rating system, not a ranking system, and eventually increase that to 16 and then 20 and then reach to our global number, which is 48, which is a ranking number. So I think a combination of rankings for long-term and ratings short-term perhaps would be able to still give the students a good idea on what is the program to look at, as well as look at the historical relevance of the program and the current relevance as well.
Thank you very much, Ashwin. Dr. Chauhan, let me take one aspect of that question to you. One of the big challenges of the way regulatory frameworks are designed is that they are usually designed keeping in mind the worst of possible experiences. The fly-by-night operators, the dubious degree sellers, all kinds of characters that exploit students, let alone promote excellence. Now, the heart of the online education environment is its ability to see education as a service and a learning opportunity, and indeed provide greater access and ultimately see greater democratization of the education system. There are for-profit companies such as Coursera on one hand, and there are organizations such as Khan Academy, which has the vision of giving education to everyone, anywhere, for free. My question to you is that how do we change the mindset of higher education regulators who are able to not only recognize the importance of seeking greater democratization of education through online, but also to be able to provide an integrity and excellence into the online framework?
So Raj, this is a tough one. We are already, without COVID or without online or without all these complications, we are still struggling to do benchmarking properly in this country, given the heterogeneity. I'll tell you, the biggest problem that I face as the chairman of NAC is that each university will walk up to us, or as a group of university. We created a lot of mono-subject university in this country. So each one say, oh, but you can't judge us on this standard. And I've been arguing university definition is simple. University education, university is university. So that apart, now the situation which you were raising, I think we have to be extremely flexible in our thinking. UGC, MHRD, NAC, or NIRF will really have to discover themselves to keep up pace with this. But is it really reality that if tomorrow COVID were to disappear, let's say suddenly with a magic wand, it disappears, would we not just go back to a lot of pressure on top brand universities and everything fall back to normal? I say this a little bit mischievously because I just take Fernandez, your last question. No matter, this is not a cynical Dr. Chauhan. This is the way I read it. No matter what QS or Times ranking or NIRF does, the brand equity which is being created by these systems of rating, ranking, I don't think is going to change. If tomorrow Oxford sees that Stanford is giving online courses and I must also give, I think Oxford, Cambridge, Imperial, UCL will make sure that they jostle out in the same space and the rankings do not dramatically change. So something like JGU or upcoming university really have to keep that in mind, that nobody is going to suddenly come ahead just because Ashish is saying something or I am saying something. I don't think anybody is going to lose its brand value. So the people
Thank you very much.
Nobody's.
But
finally, I just want to add, if online education is for massification, or let's say quality massification, then don't forget the pool of faculty and pool of students which all of us are fighting for, let's say top 100 universities in the world. I think you'll still be fighting, and therefore, up to 1 to 50 university, 1 to 50 rank in the world I see intact. But I can see a lot of smaller universities which rank between 200 to 500 really feeling the heat. I can already see through the scholarships that I'm running that there are beginning to be issues. So I don't think word order would change very much. If everybody joins, then everybody will join the race.
thank you very much, Dr. Chauhan. We are live on Republic of Letters. We're about to start our Q&A session. Send in your questions and we will get Dr. Chauhan and Dr. Fernandez answer it. We are going to be shortly ending as well. Ashwin, quick question to you. You know, for a long time, the higher education fraternity, including people like me, but also Dr. Chauhan, more Dr. Chauhan, less me, we were in denial. I will confess that. We just did not realize or even probably accept that online education is going to be growing at this pace. I mean, the data shows that the global market share for online education is going to move from something like $187 billion in 2019 to over $320 billion by 2025. That's just a 5-year period I'm talking about. So there is going to be dramatic expansion, and clearly COVID-19 is going to give new fillip to this entire online experience. My question to you is that, to what extent your rankings organization need to reinvent themselves when it comes to assessing not just brick and mortar institutions, but even institutions which are focusing on blended learning, where online will be, there will be programs which are entirely physical, there will be programs that are entirely online, there will be ones which are both. How do you change the entire methodology?
Well, in addition to the earlier answer I have, it would be at the moment too early to change the world ranking parameters, because as Professor Chauhan said as well, the big universities would continue to do, or the top 500 in the world would continue to do what they're doing irrespective. Actually, in the COVID times, their research work has actually been intensified. So I don't see a bigger, any major impact to the top 500 or top 1,000 in the world, but definitely they are going to move towards online, and we should look at them. What QS has been doing, we also have a global online MBA ranking, the online master's ranking, which we have been doing for the last few years. And I think we should start to look at at global programs and look at institutions offering blended learning as well, and then have a methodology to evaluate them. We are already started with it in India. India has been a test bed for us. I mean, a lot of people don't know QS houses almost 200 staff members in India itself. So we do a lot of innovative work coming out of India. Our e-lead certification, again, I would like to take just a few seconds on that. E-learning excellence for academic digitization was immediately launched in April this year, the moment institutions went online, because everybody was not aware, not everybody is aware what are the minimum requirements you need to have to offer online programs. What is the infrastructure do you need? What kind of feedback system do you need? So we did that. We rolled it out to universities, colleges, pan-India. Over 100 institutions right now are being evaluated, and we are keeping on giving them this rating for e-readiness. And in the next few weeks and months, we will be planning on much rigorous evaluation from a private sector. Of course, the government is doing what it has to do, but as an international independent ranking and ratings intelligence agency, we are really pushing the boundaries on this. So
thank you so much, Ashwin. Thank you very much, Ashwin, for that. Let's quickly move to some questions which have just come, and this is to Dr. Chauhan. Dr. Chauhan, what would be the major focus of NAC to evaluate an institution in a post-COVID situation? Will the core parameters remain the same, or we are looking at something new? And a question from my side, which is that when you look at, say, organizations like Coursera and Upgrad, the entry barriers for learning when it comes to pursuing degrees are almost none. If you want to study, you study but if you want to learn and then move towards certification, examination, assessment, then there is another parameter altogether. So education is seen from a different lens altogether from how universities see it. Do we need to have a conversation within universities itself when it comes to reimagining online education while maintaining the core values of what a university is?
Well, absolutely, yes. Raj, your questions are actually everything that you have thrown at me today. The answer to that is absolutely yes. And this discussion should have started yesterday. And I can tell you the NAC, I spent a lot of time thinking about it. How far behind are we? How much we need to mature? How much our system need to mature? We have 6 different kind of universities. Should there be some homogeneity there, etc., etc. So the question which has been asked through you to me, whether we will change our parameter, I think the major parameter of research output, learning outcome, quality assurance, I don't think that will change majorly. And if you know what is happening in India, and you know it very well, certain universities based on NAC score or on NIR score are allowed to give online education and others not. So we are in the very beginning of this. So yes, with the ODL, for example, when we set up the regulations, as you know, we said that below this, you cannot do ODL. And that was decided on whether you have infrastructure or whether you have dedicated faculty. I must share this with you. When we are looking at ODL, we were giving ODL education from university which were doing both physical and ODL. There were no faculty dedicated for ODL courses. I don't want to say much more than that. This thing will have to change. These things have to be put down on a piece of paper. Are we ready for standalone open university which will do just e-learning? Or are we going to entrust for next 5 years only those universities which have been in the business of education and they can also do online education? I think as we go on, these questions are extremely important. But by the way, the checking the quality or awareness of quality, I don't think it's going to fundamentally change.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chauhan, for that. Ashwin, quick question. There are several people who are watching this are asking about quality and comparisons between online and physical. And Dr. Chauhan also raised it. So, I know that you mentioned about it's early and it's new, but the question really is, obviously the methodology need to go through some, transformation, because assessing and a physical, on-campus programs and online will be different. So how do you actually compare them?
So in this case, Prof. Raj, I think the first indicator which actually we would need to look at is internationalization, and that is, I think, the indicator is set to change. In terms of how do we look at internationalization, people around the world have stopped movement. That probably has affected people who are living and working abroad. I know I work in the Middle East with universities, and I understand and I know that how people have en masse left the countries to go back to their hometowns, perhaps, and for a return which probably will take a few more months, and or probably longer than that, depending. So I think that is the first indicator set to change. And eventually, when we're looking at the faculty-student ratio, and that's the next one, which QS places a 20% emphasis on that in the World University ranking. And similarly,
Ashwin, I think there must be some technical problem. Let me quickly ask. Sorry, Ashwin, you're back?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Ashwin, okay. Go ahead, Ashwin. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so definitely the faculty-student ratio is set to change. We will see how COVID happens over the next few months, and perhaps blended learning will become the new thing. The students who we interviewed 3 weeks ago across the length and breadth of India have said that they want to go back to the classroom, but also want to have the flexibility of a blended approach. So I think that's generally what students globally also would be looking at, and we're doing different other surveys for that. We have done some reports and which are available on qs.com for reading. Pleasure, please.
Thank you very much, Ashwin. Dr. Chavan, one of the major things that has happened in the last few years is that the regulatory bodies are actually, really, progressive and constantly trying to reinvent themselves. The idea of greater autonomy and also the Institute of Eminence process, including online education, are all part of that. But one of the things that is happening is that today's students are no longer looking at universities as the only framework for education process. They are prepared to go beyond that framework and are looking at education almost, from a standpoint of service provider. And I must say that while many regulations are actually put for universities in India offering online education, there are absolutely no ways and means by which international universities offering online programs for Indian students in India is actually regulated. So in that sense, do you think, and many people in Indian higher education believe, that it actually creates a sort of an unfair disadvantage for Indian universities when they are imposed and constantly regulated, when their own counterparts around the world are charging significantly higher fees for online education, which Indian students get access to?
Yes, absolutely, yes. Again, unfortunately, answer to you, you again happens to be a yes. And there's so many things happening in India, even before COVID. There's so many things were maturing, that the transformation of NAC, the UGC looking into its own way, what we do, autonomy, IIMs being completely made independent. That's a churning of Indian education going on. But yes, we need to address what you say. For example, 1 year masters in England or from Oxford, Cambridge are still not accepted by Indian system as it were. So 1 year masters obtained in America still needs to be ratified in India. It's still doing too bad. So we are lagging behind. A lot of these things will be forced. We will be forced at UGC and MHRD to look at these things. But we're in such a fluid situation right now. So I don't know what will happen. But can I just add something which you're not asking me?
Please.
But I'll just very quickly add. I think what will happen if the size of the pot, as you said, so many $1 billion, I cannot see big tech join, a big tech company not joining very big universities such as Harvard, MIT, or Stanford, and so on. So I can't see space being left alone by Googles and Microsofts and so on. So we need to watch this space very carefully. I think you will see if that kind of money is involved. Secondly, what I'm facing directly myself from the parents right now, from the students, so a lot of scholarships body, and you know this as well, are saying that we were instituting the scholarship from campus experience, not from reading, not from experience of learning from internet on a desktop. So I think that there's a big debate going on. Should we pay $70,000 or $80,000 for online education? In India, it may not be valid right now, but I think tomorrow this will be extremely valid.
All right. Thank you very much. We have run out of time, but I really appreciate Dr. Chavan and Ashwin for your candid comments and participation. Congratulations and thank you to both Harappa and Ashoka and Pramath for putting this together.
Thanks,
Thank you so much, Dr. Chavan. It's great to see you, Ashwin and Raj. you're a natural on screen as well as in person. So congratulations.
Thank you. Let's
Thank
get
you.
there.
Thank you.
We have a very interesting valedictory keynote by the provost of Princeton University, who's just joined us. So please stay on if you'd like, and I will just take on the baton from here, Raj.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll stay on.
Thank you for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm really delighted to welcome Dr. Deborah Prentice. Debbie is the provost at Princeton University, and she's going to talk to us about her experiences at Princeton and lessons from this crisis. And I will stay on to moderate this session. Welcome, Debbie, and it's good to have you. Thank you so much for making the time to be here today. I just want to take a minute to quickly introduce Debbie. She's the provost at Princeton today. She was formerly the dean of faculty at Princeton. Background in psychology and was the chair of psychology at Princeton University, and also has a PhD from Yale. With that, Debbie, we need you to turn on your video. I know we switched it off earlier. I hope we can see you. Yes, there you are. It's so wonderful to see you, and thank you so much for making the time. And I know that you have a hard stop, but these are really strange times. We were supposed to meet in March, and look where we are meeting. Who would have said? But without further ado, Debbie, I'd let you make your opening remarks, and then I'll come back. We have an audience of almost 400 people watching us, and they have lots of questions. So I'll come back in the end with some questions. But over to you for now. You are on mute, Debbie. You are on mute.
All right.
And
hear me now?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here, and I'm actually much more interested in your questions than in what I have to say, because I live with my situation all the time. Very interested in how it relates to what you're experiencing. So let me just give some relatively brief remarks. I hope leave plenty of time for questions and exchange. So I'm assuming that many of you, most of you are familiar with U.S. higher ed, and many of you have probably participated in U.S. higher ed. I just want to say a few things about higher ed in the United States and to situate Princeton, because the main thing to know about the higher ed in the United States is just how heterogeneous it is in terms of the business model, the mission of our various institutions. You know, we're a very large, sprawling part of the American sector, and there with great variability in terms of our selectivity, our embeddedness in the state. Some of us are public, some of us are private, some of us are a combination. Princeton is at one extreme. We're a private institution, as I'm sure you all know. We're also we have an unusual budget model. Higher education in the U.S., although it does receive some public funding, even the public universities have much less than 50% public support. Organizations, you know, like our great state universities, University of Michigan, University of California, they're down to 30 or 20% public support. That has eroded over the years, and what that means is that different institutions have developed different budget models, taking advantage of the sources that they could find in their localities, so some rely heavily on tuition as a budget driver, as a source. Some rely heavily on clinical revenues from their medical schools. Some rely heavily on research. Some rely heavily on private investment. Princeton is unusual in that we have a large endowment. We have the largest endowment of the major research universities per student. Almost, if you count financial aid, somewhere around 70% of our revenues come from payout from our endowment. What that means is that we're very heavily dependent on how well the financial markets do, much less heavily dependent on tuition, on clinical revenues, on other sources of income. In this particular crisis, so in 2008, in the financial crisis of 2008, we were hit unusually hard because that was a financial crisis and the markets fell and our endowment dropped in value 25%, and we felt that directly. In this particular crisis, our budget model has been favorable. The financial markets have held up relatively well in this pandemic. And although we've experienced a lot of unusual costs and reductions in all of our sources to a certain extent, it's been nothing like the crisis of 2008. And it's been nothing like what other universities have experienced. So all universities with medical schools have been hit much harder. They've been hit much harder because those universities tend to rely a lot on clinical revenues, especially from elective surgeries and those of our elective procedures. Those have all stopped as a result of the pandemic. Whereas the costs of running the medical facilities to support treatment of COVID have gone up exponentially. So even within the small group of peers that I compare to, I'm part of what's called the Ivy Plus group, which is the Ivy League universities, plus other large private research-focused universities like Stanford and Duke and University of Chicago and MIT. Even within that very select group, there's been huge disparities in how much we've been hit by financially by the pandemic. With schools that have large medical operations, Stanford being one, being hit much, much harder than schools like Princeton. We don't have a medical school, and that has turned out to be an advantage in this moment. So I mentioned that just to say that that what you hear about different universities and what they're facing and the budget cuts they've needed to make and the staff they've needed to lay off, that really varies, university by university within this very large sector. We also differ in that we're in different states, and in the United States, we haven't been particularly united in our response to this pandemic. All of the states have gone their own ways on this one with fairly little federal oversight. So because New York and New Jersey were hit very hard, very early, those states have been very conservative in reopening. In New Jersey, we're just beginning to reopen now. We were locked down very early and have been locked down pretty much the whole time. So we are not experiencing the rises in infections that our peers are. On the other hand, the state is regulating very heavily what we can do as a university in terms of having students back, in terms of public gatherings, opening our libraries, opening our research labs. And the regulations we've been dealing with on that front are quite different from what our peers are dealing with as well. So all of this is to say that whatever you hear about U.S. higher ed, there's so much variability that I'm not sure there's much of a central tendency there. So let me just talk a little bit about our experience in this pandemic. So like many of most universities actually in the world, we ended up sending everybody home sometime in March. Middle of March, and closing everything down. We are beginning to reopen, starting with our research labs. So a number of and I should say actually, we never completely closed down. There was always a small group of students who remained on campus. We call them our remain students. These are students who, because of financial precarity, because they were international students and couldn't go home, because they didn't have a home to go to, needed to stay on campus. There were originally, I think there were sort of 400, 300 of them, somewhere between 300 and 400 of them, who have remained the entire time during the pandemic on campus. And we always had research labs who were doing critical research stay up and running. We're now trying to reopen more of our labs. We're now developing plans for reopening in the fall. We're reopening our library. We're reopening our museum. And we're discovering how difficult that process is, you know, meeting the public health guidelines, the technical specifications for how you can use indoor spaces, specifications on how you use materials, what kinds of public health regulations we have to meet. That's all very technical, very challenging. We're working on that. We are also setting up a testing lab on our campus. We are getting what's called CLIA certification so that we can do that within regulations. That too is a expensive and complicated process. We are doing that for a couple reasons. One is we want to have the capacity to test everybody in our population once a week. That's our goal. So as we're bringing back students, as the population on campus is going to be expanding, we need to have that capacity. And our state, the state of New Jersey, is not great on capacity. They have not invested. They're building capacity to test. But it is still the case in New Jersey that you cannot get a COVID test if you're not symptomatic. We need to be able to test asymptomatic individuals on a regular basis. And so we're setting up this lab. So let me talk a little bit about what we learned in the spring from our students' experiences. So we managed to get all of our courses online in short order. We did that as best we could. Mainly that meant adapting pretty much what we were doing in person to an online format. And I think the surprise is that it went as well as it did. Our faculty leaned into it. Our graduate teaching assistants leaned into it, invested time and effort in it. And that paid off impressively. Our graduating class of seniors, they all graduated. They got their senior theses done. They had the tailwinds of all the work they had done leading up to March. So it's not a pure test of the online model. But I think in general it went better than we could have expected. The students didn't enjoy it, and we're working on ways to make it better, obviously, digging into the literature, accumulating literature. And of course, this moment is creating a lot of innovation in this space, which is fantastic, right? A lot of people are coming up with great new ideas, and some of our faculty are as well, making things, making the groups smaller, more frequent meetings, project-based work. We've got our physicists are working on creating labs that they can mail home to students so they don't have to bring them back just to do their laboratory courses. So lots of really interesting things going on that front. That's an innovation space. It's exciting. And I think we are optimistic that in the fall, for those students who are studying online, and we know that we will have quite a lot of students studying online in the fall, no matter who we bring back, we'll have some very good online courses to offer. It's the rest of what is involved in residential education that's a lot more difficult to offer online. And it's really those things that are leading us. It's wanting to be able to provide more of those things, access to the immense resources, the libraries, the laboratories, and the people, right, that Princeton has to offer. We want to try to give all of our students, undergraduate students, access to that at some point during the year. We're not, we don't have a fully developed plan yet, but that's our goal. We know we're going to, like all of our peer institutions, need to be bringing only part of the students in at a time because our residential facilities won't allow us to bring everybody back and keep everybody safe. But we're following that model. You're hearing other U.S. institutions announcing that model, and we're very much in step with them. I think it's important to say that there's some amount of criticism of that approach. People saying that we're just doing it to collect tuition. I can tell you Princeton is not very tuition dependent. We do collect tuition, but because we have generous financial aid and have been working hard to get students who need financial aid. In fact, our net tuition has fallen over the last 20 years. So and our budget model is not highly tuition dependent. So that's not the reason really to have the students back. For the revenues, it is for some budget models, not for ours. The reason to have them back is to try to bring back as much as we can what we do, which is in fact residential undergraduate education. We don't, as our president says, we don't know how long we're going to be in this. It's not something that we can wait out. We've got to press forward and try to do what we do as best we can. Just a couple comments on some things we've gotten much better at. What this crisis has led us to do is do much more collection of data on all fronts. So we've set up our own COVID tracker because we need to know the public health data. We need to understand how our populations are being affected by the virus as we start thinking about bringing them back. So we've developed our own COVID tracker, dug into the literature online and done a lot of work there. And really availed ourselves of absolutely every possible data source. Public opinion data, some of our organizations like the AAU have been collecting data that can inform us about what our students and their families need. So we've really upped our game there. And the other place that we've really improved, I think, is in our communications with peers. My group of provosts of the Ivy Plus universities used to meet twice a year if we remembered to set up the second meeting. Otherwise, it was once a year. Now we meet every week on Zoom to talk about all the things we're allowed to talk about. We are not, as a group, allowed to talk about financial things because there's antitrust legislation in the United States that prevents that, so we don't talk about financial things. But we talk about everything else. We share best practices, talk about how we're meeting the demands of our time. Hugely helpful. It's hugely helpful. And the AAU also organizes its provost. So those are the large research universities. There are about 65 members of the AAU. We meet about maybe monthly or every other month. They provide us with data. We have opportunities to discuss with each other. That's very helpful as well. So we've really pulled together, I think, as a sector. So I want to leave time for questions. So I'm going to close here by saying I wanted to make one point, which is at the outset of this pandemic, there was lots of talk about how this was going to be, a critical moment, an incredible disruption to higher education, that it was going to completely change the way people were educated. Some people were saying that we were all going to be online forever. We were going to give up on residential education. I see the way this has played out and the way it is looking forward, even though we're facing a lot of criticism about our reopening plans, and there's still a lot of rancor around it. I mean, we're both criticized for reopening because of the public health risks. We're criticized for not reopening because the students want to come back to campus. It's a very noisy space, I would say. But I actually think that I see much more continuity than disruption here. I think we will all get better online. I think we will do more things online in the future. I think that's great. I think we should, but I think the core of our model for those of us who do residential education is still going to be residential education. There will be those institutions that do online. They do it well. They'll keep doing online, but I think there's demand for both. I think, I don't think this is going to be a death knell for liberal arts, for, jobs in the humanities, for example, academic jobs in the humanities. I mean, those have been declining over time. I don't think this is going to be a huge jump in that. I think at the end of the day, we're large organizations. We're in many, one of the things that this pandemic has reminded us all is that we're large economic drivers of our regions. Our Princeton University is either the largest or the second largest employer in Mercer County in our part of New Jersey. I think we're the second largest, and I think the largest is the state, because the state capital is in Mercer County, New Jersey. So, you know, trying to keep our workforce employed, that's part of why we're trying to reanimate our campus as well, keeping our workforce employed, and meeting the needs of our students and the demands for more spaces at Princeton. It keeps our model of education alive and vibrant even during this time. So with that, I would love to hear your questions.
Thank you, Debbie. That was really fascinating to see the ground you covered there. And I'm still absorbing everything, but I have a stream of questions coming in. But I was intrigued by your point about the provost's meeting and the interesting ideas. I would love to hear if there are some interesting ideas that stand out that you could share with us, either that you've done at Princeton or you've heard others do, the innovations and the new things that you came across.
You know, what I would say is, and you can find all of this on the web. You know, so that's one of the great things about this is that, you know, a lot of this, you know, as universities put out this material to their communities, they're putting it out to the world as well, right? So, you know, Johns Hopkins has the best COVID tracker. They've had the best COVID tracker forever, and we've all used it, right? Cornell did some fabulous modeling work. Cornell has great materials. I would definitely recommend them as well. But they've done some great modeling work on the public health side that we're all relying on. MIT has decided to seize this moment to look forward, which is a very MIT thing to do. So, you know, they say we were born in the you know, post-war years and this is our, you know, next horizon going forward. I mean, most of us can barely get through the week. MIT is already, you know, planning for the future, and so, you know, I think that that each of our organizations has doubled down on its strengths, right? Princeton's strengths really in this space. I mean, Princeton, you know, among research universities, what we're known for is our commitment to basic science. Even our engineers do quite a lot of basic science, a lot of theory, right? So we've got that core. We've got undergraduate education, residential education, you know, heavily subsidized with financial aid. We've got a very distinctive model there. And then it's PhD education, and that's what we do, right? We're not professional schools. So, you know, when we're talking about how best to serve PhDs, when we're talking about how best to give a high-touch kind of residential education model, that's when people come to us. When they want to, you know, plan boldly for the future, they go to MIT. When they want, Cornell has, as far as I can tell, the best data operation. Johns Hopkins has the best public health operation, and we share ideas across our institutions.
That's very interesting. I like your point about doubling down on your strengths at a time like this, because we are all feeling the pressures, but I think that's a good place to go back to at a time like this. As you talked about the other universities, though, I was struck by the fact that you were saying Johns Hopkins is best for that, Cornell is best for that, MIT is best for that, and this is a Princeton provost. And I think learners are also feeling a little bit that way. That could I get the best from Princeton and the best from Johns Hopkins and the best from Cornell? Do you see the world going that way, and what would that look like? and this is a question that has come on the chat board from a young learner, that, you know, this is a chance for us to experience the best from around the world.
Yeah, you know, I honestly, I hope so. I think this may accelerate developments in that direction. I think there were, you know, green shoots of that kind of effort before COVID. I think, so certainly, for example, Harvard and MIT in particular have collaborated a lot more, I think, around especially creating the best possible online offerings. I mean, so they have a history of doing this with edX, but I think that they have expanded that in this time. I think we're going to see really interesting, great things coming out of Harvard and MIT on that going forward. And, you know, I think we would be, we in Princeton are going to look to them, not for things we might do, but for things that they're doing that we might in fact enable our students to have a piece of. That I think that mindset is going to help us all. I see it on the research front already, right? I mean, you know, you see it in the way collaborations now are just drawing on the best talent across institutions rather than, you know, within institutions. So that's when I referred to how we've seen some of this before. I've seen it on the research front before. I think we're going to see it more on the teaching front. I hope so. I think it would be a great development for all of us.
That's an interesting analogy, that in research, this kind of cross-institution collaboration used to always happen. And right. I think do you think that there's a situation tomorrow where a Princeton student will take a course online at Ashoka and get credit for it?
I mean, possibly. I think the question would be, you know, the way we've thought about study abroad before has been, you know, that what Ashoka could offer Princeton or what Princeton could offer Ashoka is an opportunity to be there, right? To in fact experience the world that these universities, that these colleges and universities live in, right? That's one model of what we might bring to each other. The purely pedagogical, right? The online is a different model. And I think you need to have the case for it, right? You need to have the academic case for what it would bring. But sure, why not, right?
Yeah, and it's almost like you could go back to this model where the student wants the best of everything that they can get. And the virtualization of the campus. So, you know, this seems like a fantastic thing to say, but it almost feels like the world is becoming a large virtual university.
In this moment, to a certain extent, right?
Yeah, and I wonder how then, you know, is it difficult for places like Princeton, who are so rooted in the Princeton value brand ethos, to think about it that way? Does that feel threatening, or does that feel like it's a good way to go?
It feels like it's a very good way to go. You know, I think it's true. Princeton has always been very rooted in its physical place. Right, and many American universities, colleges and universities are like this. They're located, I mean, many of them, in fact, were developed, like all the land-grant schools were developed in order to serve the people who occupy their state, right? So that's an old model of what education is. I think Princeton has always been very rooted in its campus. The campus is lovely, but I think that, again, has been changing. The pressures to change that predated COVID. The pressures to, Princeton has been referred to as the orange bubble. Orange because that's one of our school colors. It's not a very positive image in my mind, an orange bubble. But actually, I think, you know, we've been saying for 5-10 years now that we actually want to get rid of the orange bubble. We want to have porous boundaries. We want to send our students out. We want to bring them back. We want to send them out into our local region, which is very heterogeneous, and they can learn a huge amount from central New Jersey, but we want to send them out into the world as well. I mean, that's how you and I met, right? Was in neither of our homes in Paris, talking about what we can all do together. I think, so that trend has been coming. I think we will always want our place to be we've got a fabulous library, but we're digitizing everything. We imagine our place to be a draw for people, but we want the resources of our place to be available more broadly, and we want our people to be able to move more broadly.
Debbie, how pressed are you? I have two questions quickly.
Okay, go ahead.
Research, and you're a scientist, and you talked a bit about that, but how is that, particularly the research that needs experiments and data and so on, how do you see that managing in a time like this? People are doing PhDs.
That's the hardest. So the research we've kept up on our campus has been the research that's critical, not just to solving COVID and long-term experiments, but to graduate students' careers, because it is, you could lose your whole PhD thesis during this time, and we don't want to see that happen. That's one of the reasons why we're bringing back students to campus, those students who can't do their work remotely. That's one reason why we're bringing research up first, and bringing the library up first, and the museum, to make research materials available. There is a materiality to not just science, but to even some other aspects of scholarship, architecture, for example. And we want to make that possible. Yeah, absolutely.
Quick last question, Debbie, and this is more to you. There's a lot of education leaders who have joined us today. Right now, there are over 300 people listening to this, and many more on YouTube. A provost's job is tough in normal times. How tough has it been, and how have you dealt with this, and what advice would you give all the leaders who are here, who are going to still have to deal with this for the next 6-12 months?
Yeah, probably longer, right? Probably longer. It is actually tough. I mean, I'm generally upbeat, but I have to, and I tend to look on the bright side. But that's been really hard. I mean, it's not brought out the best in people at all, right? I mean, I tend to say that we've all pulled together, and we have, I mean, as best we could, but it's been seriously challenging. So, and provosts, I think, take the brunt of it in a lot of ways. Although I think, the dysphorias of being a president have been apparent to me as well. I think my president has had, less of the operational response, less of the nitty gritty details to worry about, but what are you leading, right? When you're leading a university that suddenly can't have its students, right? It's an existential crisis, I think, for many of them, for obvious reasons. What I would say is there's a reason why my provosts now meet every week. We get strength from each other. I mean, we don't get just good ideas, but we get, camaraderie and mutual understanding. And I love my team. I mean, the people, my vice provost, the people who directly report for me. Again, I think, you discover really, the weaknesses in your organization for sure, but you also discover its strengths. And I think, I hope that people can draw strengths both from their peers and from their staff.
That's such a wonderful note to end this entire conference on. And thank you for agreeing to be the valedictory keynote for us at such short notice. I'd love to come back and connect with you in a few months, because this medium allows us to, and I'm sure many of our audience would love to hear about how you've progressed over the last 6 months. But all the very best, and thank you very, very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Well, that brings us to a close. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us over the last 3 days. It's been tremendous to have you with us. I think we've had over 3,000 registrations for the conference. Each day we had roughly 1,300 people join us, both on Zoom and on YouTube. I don't have the data for today, but certainly the last 2 days. We had 9 keynote speakers. We had 27 sessions, give or take 1 or 2, precisely 25. We had almost 80 plus panelists. So it's been amazing to have you all join us. You can check out our recordings of all sessions on YouTube. And I would like to just end by thanking all our partners, the Association of Indian Universities, Careers 360, College Dunia, Digital Learning, EdTech Review, the Education Promotion Society of India, Harvard Business Publishing, Harvard Business School, Ashoka University and the entire team there, and of course the entire team at Harappa Education that has done an amazing job of pulling all this together. We just started to put this together on the 11th of June. I was looking at my WhatsApp group that I set up, and from 11th of June to here, it's amazing what it's possible to do in a short period of time. Thank you very much for joining us. The Republic of Letters will be back. I hope that it won't be long before we can connect again with you. We will try to come back with fresh and new ideas over the course of the next few months. Thank you very much for joining us. Please stay safe. Please be safe and sound and stay well and look after yourselves and your families. Thank you very, very, very much. Thank you.